If there's something strange and it don't look good, who you gonna call? Live from across the plain, still struggling through Google Hangouts, comes the coolest guys you've ever met. Oops, wrong show. Comes the guys who may be weird, who may not be mainstream, and who may believe in things many might call crazy. But these guys are after the truth, and sometimes the truth is the craziest thing you've ever heard.
Let's get down to business. I don't got no time to play around. What is this? Must be a circus in town. Shut the shit down. These clowns get up in a wing list.
Mayor, Mr. Mayor, come take a look at this.
Oh, is it? Have you ever seen anything like that? Somebody get me the Globe Busters.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Globe Busters.
And welcome everybody to Globe Busters, Flat Earth, the Sky, and Its Limits. I am your host, Bob, Xanadude60, and we have another great show for you this week, and got lots to talk about, and I've had several things happen this week, so got some great stuff for you. But before we get to that, I'll go ahead and introduce my two co-hosts. We have Jaron from Jaronism here with us today. How you doing today, Jaron?
Good, Bob. Yourself?
Doing good. Nice day in Denver today. Love spring. And we also have John the Morgau with us. How you doing today, John?
Very nice. Thanks for asking, man. Hope y'all are doing great.
Yes, sir. We are doing very, very well. So cannot complain there. So, all right. So I guess a couple things that we want to talk about first before we get to our main subject, which of course is the sky and its limits. And there's all kinds of things that we can take into account with that. Is last week we attempted to start talking about your new video that you hadn't quite released yet, John. And that is called Flat Earth, which came first, gravity or the sphere. And I got to tell you, I watched it and I love it. I think it is such a good video. You asked some of the most, obvious questions that really don't make a whole lot of sense in the heliocentric model. But, you kind of ultimately started out with saying that, which came first, the chicken or the egg. And since science can't really even give us much of a answer on that, the whole idea of whether or not gravity or the sphere came first is a kind of another one of those types of questions, which I thought was pretty amazing because, we did talk a little bit about it last week. And, I was saying that it seemed crazy to me that, after this alleged Big Bang explosion, that, you have this stellar material that was emanated from the Big Bang, and it's going at some fabulous, incredibly fast speed. Obviously, it would have to be going beyond the speed of light. But all that notwithstanding, one has to ask the question, how did it ever slow down enough to where the particulates came to a point where they could start kind of attracting towards each other? So I kind of wanted to start out with you giving us a little bit of a synopsis of your video, and we can take it from there.
Yeah, totally. And, what you said is true. Like everything should have technically come from the Big Bang because according to that theory, before the Big Bang, there was nothing. I don't know if space and time existed prior to that, but, I guess you could argue for space and time being created in the Big Bang theory. But according to one publication that I found in reference in that video was they basically claimed that these nebulae are basically stationary, which, something sitting stationary in space is sort of it's sort of an oddity, but that's what they claim. Like they claim to have measured the velocity of our sun compared to some nebula. I don't think it's necessarily, the sun's alleged birthing nebula, but they essentially said that they're moving away from one another, the sun and the nebula, at about 18.5 kilometers per second. But the majority of that relative motion is based on the sun's motion. Now, to me, that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because the sun is ultimately supposed to be traveling with the galaxy at some millions of miles an hour. So then that begs the question, is this nebula part of the galaxy, or is it something else? Because it would sort of have to be part of the galaxy. But there's just all of these conundrums involved with first the Big Bang itself, but then star formation and planet formation. And you nailed it. I mean, in terms of the chicken and the egg, that's the circle of life, or whatever, that we can, clearly see happens. I mean, chickens hatch, they lay eggs, and more chickens hatch. So it's a definite thing that's observable. But yeah, we have really no explanation as to which came first, the chicken or the egg. And so to me, it's just really, it's typical of science to claim that they have answers to things like, how stars and planets were formed, but the whole process is just one, impossible enigma after another. So like giving them the Big Bang Theory for argument's sake, which is a big one, but yeah, you have these nebula, which are diffuse clouds of ionized dust and plasma and gases like hydrogen and helium, or so they claim, that are more or less stationary in the cosmos, that somehow exist in the, the near perfect vacuum of space. So, that begs the question, well, how does a cloud exist in a vacuum? Because technically that's not possible. So, science's answer to that question is, well, it's really, really cold. And so the gases and the dust are sort of at a, close to absolute zero. So they're in sort of a quasi physical state of matter, but it's, clouds of gases. So that's sort of an oxymoron right there, right? So a cloud of frozen material. But so giving them that, they claim that stars are birthed out of this nebula, and, leave it to theoretical physics to claim that stars come from super cooled diffuse gases in the far reaches of space. So that's sort of funny. But the question is, if this giant cloud of gas somehow births a star, which is sort of an enigma of itself, like where did the gravity come from in order to start that star on its snowballing effect? Because we all know that gravity is so weak that it needs really, really massive objects to create gravity. And so that's sort of the first situation. It's like where, which came first, the gravity or the star? And really, there is no answer for that. They claim that, little particles of dust sort of condense and coalesce with little particles of gas, and then you have this snowballing effect. But, where in reality can you demonstrate diffuse gases, exhibiting gravity and starting off that snowballing effect? Now, furthermore, at some point in this process of star formation, you have the theoretical jump starting of hot atomic fusion. And we all know that's merely a theoretical process that only exists, sort of on paper in theory, but has never been demonstrated. And so we have yet another sort of theoretical dogma that we're supposed to adhere to in order to, stick with the conventional explanation of star formation. So handing them that one, star formation for argument's sake, then you have this other huge problem of the star somehow accelerating away from its host nebula, because you'd expect that if by whatever means the star formed within the belly of this nebula, that it would be very gravitationally rich as well as very hot. And so either the dust and gases comprising the nebula should technically either coalesce and assimilate to become part of the star, or it should, heat up and expand and evaporate and, expand out into the far reaches of the universe. So that's another big sort of issue, but somehow some force causes the stars to be accelerated away from the nebula, and that's when planet formation sort of begins. They say that the dust and gases, or some of the dust and gases from the hosting birthing nebula, sort of trail along with the star as it ventures out into the cosmos. And that's another big problem, because again, you can't have diffuse sort of amorphous disparate clouds of dust and gas in a vacuum. vacuum, certainly not, a perfect planar disk of gases surrounding a star at, going stellar velocities through space. Yet that's exactly what they claim happens. And in fact, this sort of planar ring around the stars or the sun is what allegedly coalesced to form the planets. So just specifically, talking of planet Earth, then we'd be talking about the gases surrounding the sun, more or less about 93 million miles in radius away from the sun, somehow coalescing and forming into Earth. Now, there's two big problems here because the only way that Earth, allegedly remains 93 million miles away from the sun, orbiting around a perfect plane around the sun, is because of the Earth's large, dense, massive structure that allows for it to reciprocate the sun's theoretical gravity well. And quite frankly, the gases that were allegedly there prior to Earth couldn't have possibly been gravitically rich enough to reciprocate such a relationship. And so, it really just seems to be like it's a big fairy tale. And then again, you have the same issue with, okay, so assuming that these gases were there surrounding the sun in all directions in a perfect ring around the sun, then what process kickstarted the gravity that, would later form to the spinning spherical Earth? And so you've just got, I don't know how many I just named, but like half a dozen sort of, insurmountable issues with the just basic logic in terms of accepted star and planet formation. And so, that was basically the crux of the video. And I think that really the cherry on top is, again, the fact that science or science claims to know how all this happened, yet nobody's ever seen a star or planet form. On the other hand, we've all seen chickens form, and yet we don't have an answer for that. So it is a bit comical, and it's kind of sad as well.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? There are so many assumptions, like you said, that you just, all those gimmies that we have basically handed them in this assumption. And it all starts from, the Big Bang, which supposedly whatever happened in this singularity, it exploded and became, everything. All the material for all the universe came out of this Big Bang. But they never talk about, at that point, anything that would be coalescing, into that singularity. So where did it get all of its material from? So that's one of the first fallacies. The next fallacy after that is, again, like I mentioned earlier, if it is exploding from that singularity at a point of incredible velocity, then you have to wonder how long did it take before anything was able to even overcome that inertia from the Big Bang to start coalescing into, planets and suns and everything like that. Because, obviously, I think it's implied with the stars that the gravitational force would have to be there first in order for them to form. And the reason I say that is because at some point, even like when they describe the Cavendish experiment, supposedly, having two lead balls and being able to attract each other, if you scale that down into two minute dust particulates at some point, if they've slowed down enough to be able to overcome the inertia to be attracted to each other gravitationally, then that would essentially, supposedly start this process. And, what are the odds of that happening? Absolutely incalculable. And, these are the things that just really don't make any sense, especially when we're talking about the idea of gravity in the first place, which when you look at, what gravity is, it has never been properly explained ever. And so, yeah, the whole thing just really doesn't add up. And I think that your video really had a lot of really good points on it. And so I think that's one area that we can definitely start on is gravity. Okay, so what exactly is gravity? We've talked about this many times before. Mainstream science defines it as the attractive properties that two objects with any amount of mass would have towards each other. However, whatever this attractive property is, whether it's gravitational waves or whatever, apparently has never really been measured. And that, of course, is one major problem. One of the things that I was looking at earlier this week was LIGO and how it actually worked. So, because I'm really trying to figure out exactly what mainstream science is talking about, when it's talking about gravity and, whether or not there are indeed these things called gravitational waves. So when I'm looking at LIGO, okay, which of course we've already pretty much debunked their whole, detection of gravimetric waves as something that looks like two magnetic toroid fields come together. But when you you look at space.com and how it's actually described to work, well, first of all, there are two of these facilities. One is in Hanford, the Hanford Observatory in Richland, Washington, and the other one is in Livingston, Louisiana. So both of these things are set up. And so here's what space.com says. The Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory searches for distortions in space-time that indicate the passage of gravitational waves through the Earth. A laser beam is split down two 2.5-mile arms containing mirrors. Okay, so far so good. The laser beams reflect off mirrors to converge at the crux of the arms, canceling each other out. The passage of gravitational wave alters the length of the arms. What? The passage of gravitational wave alters the length of the arms? All right. Now that right there, you got to ask, how does it do that? Okay. That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But allowing, giving them that another gimme will continue on, causing the beams to travel different distances. Well, this sounds a lot like the Sagnac effect, doesn't it, when we're talking about gyroscopes? But instead of it being the light, traveling different distances, because of motion, they're just saying that the gravitational waves are actually physically altering the physical length of these arms, right?
Maybe they would say it has something to do with time dilation. I'm not sure.
Sure, might as well throw another theoretical in there, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's absolute nonsense, right? So, go on. LIGO facilities in Louisiana and Washington State operate simultaneously, so that basically, if this fictitious gravitational wave comes through, that actually physically alters the space in between the laser, the beam splitter, and the mirrors on each side on these 4-kilometer arms, which again, how does that work? But so if both LIGO facilities actually have this happen simultaneously, then they've got a positive hit for gravitational waves. But, for whatever reason, they're looking for these gravitational waves, like I said, and they supposedly found them a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, which makes absolutely no sense. So I was thinking a little bit about that, and I was thinking about the Cavendish experiment, right? So everybody's talking about, oh yeah, the Cavendish experiment, it absolutely proves gravity, yada, yada, yada. You can put these lead balls together, and then you can see that the balls are actually attracted to each other because they're drawn, minutely ever closer to each other. So I'm thinking about that, and it's like, okay, so if there is a field there, whatever gravity is, a gravitational field, right, and there is some sort of perturbation because of mass that is drawing the two lead balls together, then there should be some sort of measurable change in some sort of wave, whether you call it gravitational or electrostatic or whatever the field is that hosts the gravity, it should be measurable. So why can't they measure these gravitational waves in between the two lead balls that are carried out in the Cavendish experiment, right? I mean, obviously, if there is a force strong enough or a field strong enough that it will actually cause two lead balls to be attracted to each other, we should be able to measure that field, right? It stands to reason to me. I mean, I can't imagine that, these things are being drawn towards each other and there is no measurable distortion in any field or whatever. So why can't we take this LIGO principle and, put it and measure whatever it is they're measuring, a physical change in distance of a light beam in between the balls in a Cavendish experiment? It seems to me that would be so much more easy than trying to measure something that happened a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. The same thing goes for the moon, right? The moon supposedly is its gravitational attraction is so powerful that it's causing the tides on the Earth. Again, we're talking about a substantial force there to be able to draw up trillions of tons of water, right? And so what is the field that's being manipulated here? And if we can't measure something that is as intense between the moon and the ocean, this field changing that's causing the tides to be drawn up to the moon, then once again, why are we looking over 4 billion light years away for two black holes to be drawn together to do this? You would have thought that if this gravitational wave was so much more powerful that was caused by the two black holes coming together, we would have felt that here on Earth, right? We would have felt it in many more ways than just it being detected on this crazy principle that the LIGO works on. So that's one of the first things that, again, people, you have to use your common sense and ask these these kind of questions. Why is NASA and LIGO looking for this mysterious force again a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away when we have all these supposed interactions of gravity that are happening around us? Why can't we simply measure it in the local, in the present, current time and date, right? That's the one thing that doesn't make any sense to me. So if they want to measure gravitational waves, they should be able to put something right in between those two lead balls. Bada bing, there's your gravity waves. End of story. But of course, the problem is that most people that are claiming that the Cavendish experiment actually works, which I have yet to see an example of where that actually does work, they should be able to detect that field change in between the two objects. So that's one of the first places that you really have to start thinking about, this whole crazy cosmology that starts with this mysterious force called gravity. And then from there, it gets even more and more and more unlikely, as you were describing, John.
Yeah, totally. And you brought up some really good points. So one thing that I have a big issue with is the relevancy or the accuracy of the Cavendish experiment to begin with, because like you said, I mean, we really can't demonstrate anywhere in reality mass being attracted to mass, even if you're dealing with really, really large objects. And I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Cavendish's balls weighed like 300 pounds each or something like that. So they were pretty heavy, but they weren't like, I don't know, they weren't tons. And, you can do, experiments with multi-ton blocks and they don't appear to be attractive whatsoever. So it really brings into question the legitimacy of Cavendish's data, especially considering the fact that that experiment, his findings weren't released until after he was dead. And it was really, really convenient to the Astronomical Society that he was really closely knit with. In fact, he was sort of a recluse. He didn't have any social life. He would literally avoid people like the plague, although he was really, really in good with this Astronomical Society. And all of his fellows seemed to be, making names for themselves and coming out with theories and experiments and, numbers crunchers and this and that. And by the time Cavendish died, he was like the only one of his little clique that hadn't done anything of accomplishment. And what was so, to me, very questionable about it is they went through his journals and stuff after he was dead and found that not only had he cracked a lot of the problems or come up with solutions similar to what his colleagues had done prior to the time when they had come up with them, but he also came up with the Cavendish experiment to weigh the Earth, or in other words, come up with the gravitational constant. So the whole thing is very suspect to me, and it's almost as if they invented this character, Cavendish, or possibly used a patsy in order to get the gravitational constant out there, because it really seems like it's a number that they back engineered to suit their models. It really doesn't appear to be a number that was derived from experimentation. Now that's probably a whole nother talk in and of itself, but you also mentioned the moon's gravity is supposedly what causes the tides. So yeah, I've thought of this a lot. I mean, if we can measure a gravity wave from 1.3 billion years ago, 1.3 billion light years away, you'd think that they could measure a gravity wave from the moon, seeing how it's allegedly tugging up on the oceans. But I would say that the biggest problem with LIGO, and they were very aptly named, is that if I'm not mistaken, one of Einstein's predictions of how they would be able to measure gravity waves was if you hypothetically had a black hole, and if you hypothetically had another black hole, and the two of them, the twain would meet at some point, that they would cause this catastrophic ripple through space-time with super gravity waves, and that would be the key. And isn't it just sort of funny how LIGO discovered the first case of, allegedly documented black holes, binary black holes, and binary black holes doing exactly what Einstein predicted would be, sort of the key to discovering gravity waves. So the whole thing stinks to me. And the fact that they present not one, but two real computer simulations, which is, by the way, an oxymoron. Either something's real or it's a simulation. It can't be both. But, the fact that they're coming up with such doublespeak and in such a timely fashion so as to sort of, debunk flat Earth, to me, it was just too convenient. But At the end, yeah, go ahead, Jared.
I was just gonna say, wasn't it also like 100 years to the date that was predicted? I
Was
believe
it?
that.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was that they from Einstein's prediction to the day that they supposedly discovered it was 100 years precisely.
Wow.
Yeah. So and you're right, John. That whole oxymoron about the simulation. It's like a genuine imitation of an artificial simulation, right? It makes about that much sense.
Right.
So yeah. So I mean, so far we in science's mainstream cosmology we have come up with the unlikely event of the singularity, which then of course causes the Big Bang, which then of course causes all the material in the entire universe to be expulsed from a single point, and then at some point down the line, the velocity of all this has slowed enough where each one of these small, minute particulates is allowed to then be gravitationally attracted to each other and kind of coagulate, into one, into small spheres, right? And ultimately, when the stars form, right, they are collecting all this stardust from this nebula material, and it's getting denser and denser and denser. And of course, when it gets denser and denser, it's also supposedly getting hotter and hotter because of the pressure that is being exerted on it. So gravity has now gone, from this incredibly weak force to being so unbelievably strong that at some point it's going to cause a massive explosion right into the star, and fusion is going to start taking place. Right? Again, this has never been demonstrated. It is so highly theoretical, it's beyond belief. And in fact, so many ways it's been debunked, straight up, but it's still allowed to go on as part of our mainstream cosmology. So here we are, one assumption right after another, and now we're at the point where, okay, now we're going to have stars that are forming. So now let's just say that our sun has now exploded into a light star, and it's now out there burning. And for whatever reason, I don't know whether this has occurred afterwards or if it was supposedly occurred simultaneously, but all of the planets then are coalescing, at some point. And in addition to being, coalescing with all the particulates that have been expulsed out of the singularity, they are also being attracted gravitationally to the sun. But what's weird about this is they're not being attracted directly to the sun, but they are being attracted in a way where they constantly are missing the sun and are following around it for whatever reason, right? And this is just magically happening, presumably at the same time that they're being formed. Would that be correct, or does mainstream even have a position on that?
Yeah, no, they claim that the solar system, and just say that all the planets are on the ecliptic plane. So more or less they are, but at least the Earth definitely is. That's where we get the baseline. But anyway, assuming that all the planets were on the ecliptic plane, then yes, allegedly all of these gases were literally in a perfect planar equatorial ring surrounding the sun, which is just impossible by so many ways. But yeah, somehow at some point, one little clump of dust somehow gravitationally attracted another little clump of dust, and then another and another, until the point where you've got something planet-sized. But it really doesn't work because, again, gravity needs to have massive objects to generate any sort of pulling in attraction. And frankly, a cloud of dust and gas couldn't exist around the sun in a vacuum anyway. It should have either dissipated or assimilated to become the sun. So yeah, there really is no explanation for it. And I think that theoretical astrophysicists really haven't thought this through because, frankly, the Earth needs to be a very large, high-density, massive sphere in order to reciprocate the gravitational relationship with the sun. And frankly, particles spread out over a quadrillion square miles doesn't qualify as a high-density sphere.
Yeah. Okay, so moving forward then, this story just keeps getting increasingly more difficult to believe. But now we've got our star formed and we've got our planets formed. And of course, this is going on simultaneously all around the universe, right? But we just happen to be right here in the Goldilocks zone, for planet Earth. So we're going to keep looking at that. And as well as other objects in our solar system. And of course, the Halley's Comet is one thing we definitely want to address on this as well.
Oh, yeah.
But so we've got all of this gravitational events that are happening around us. Now, one of the questions that I would have is, does mainstream science, they obviously tell us that this is still happening. This process is still ongoing because they say that nebulas are stellar nurseries, right? So apparently that these gas nebulas, the same thing is still still ongoing. There's still these gravitational attractions happening to the point where, stars are being formed that are, as massive as our sun to many, many thousands of times more massive than our sun, in the stellar nurseries like Eta Carina and stuff like that. So once we get to that point, then all of a sudden nature has also decided that every single object that orbits that star has magically taken on the perfect trajectory that, of course, these orbits never seem to decay over, thousands, millions, billions of years even, who knows? We certainly know that our sky hasn't changed in thousands of years, but, it just seems kind of unlikely to me that would even be the case. So here we have another thing that we're being asked to swallow about this entire incredible model that, we can prove absolutely zero of any part of this happening right from the inception of the Big Bang itself.
And not just prove, not just can we not prove it, but we can't even observe it. Sorry, but go ahead.
That's right. Yeah, we can't observe it. We can't. Nobody has ever seen a star born. The whole hypothesis that nebulas are stellar nurseries is just that. It's just an assumption. It's a poor assumption at that. It's a wild guess if you really want to be honest about it. Because again, we have never seen this actually happen. We've never seen a star be born, and nor have we ever actually seen a star go supernova. Now they will tell you that we have seen this and we have evidence of it, but we have never actually seen the star actually do this. Unless once again it goes in the context of, oh yeah, this happened, several thousand years ago because it took the light all this time to get to us. Once again, pure speculation, and I personally don't believe it. Even if it was true, it just seems like it's incredibly unlikely. And the reason for that goes back to something that we covered a long time ago, called the inverse square law. And basically what that's telling us is that light, at a certain intensity, or radio waves or anything else you want to look at, as you move away from the source of that light or radio transmission or whatever, decreases in intensity at the square of the distance, and the intensity goes down inversely to the square of the distance as it travels away from it, which means that it's not necessarily the size of the object that is emanating the light so much as it is the intensity. So you have to ask yourself, if all stars are basically operating the same way, but you have, and granted you have, red giants and you have yellow ones and you have, blue ones and different colors and stuff like that. But the point is they all seem to have roughly the same intensity because they're all supposedly working off of these thermonuclear reactions, right? Well, again, it all goes back to the initial intensity of light at this source. And anybody that has ever played around with a flashlight or a candle or anything like that knows that it doesn't take very long, if you're moving away from that light source before that light source fades away into oblivion, right? So this is something else that, once again, we're just asked to accept all this stuff, on blind faith with absolutely zero proof whatsoever. And, ultimately, we're going to bring this back to a point of Occam's razor, of is all these unlikelihoods, right, starting from the Big Bang, the singularity, the formation, gravity, yada, 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 and of course, we're also going to talk about evolution in all of this. Is all of this really likely in an Occam's razor scenario, or is it more likely that there was a creator that assembled all this and there was intelligent design? I think the answer to that is pretty obvious, but let's continue looking at the absurdities by moving on to the idea of how life began. Okay.
Hey, real quick before you do, hold that thought. I think I need to do the disclaimer about gravity just in case.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, so for anyone out there who's new to this and isn't sure what we're talking about, when we say that, when we're disagreeing with gravity, we don't mean, we're arguing what goes up must come down. That's obviously going to happen. So what we're arguing is that gravity is a warping of space-time caused by the spherical Earth. Instead, it appears that what goes up must come down is caused by density and buoyancy, and ultimately governed by the static electric charge of the Earth as the natural tendency for high density objects to fall. So anyway, that is the disclaimer about gravity. Go ahead, Bob, about life on Earth.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, and that's true. And we'll even touch on that a little bit as well for those that did not see, my alternate explanation. It's not my explanation. Let me make that perfectly clear. I wasn't smart enough to come up with that. I had only experienced it enough that once I heard the truth, truth. It made sense to me. But there are many other physicists and engineers that believe that this thing that we're calling gravity is definitely an electromagnetic / electrostatic effect. And this is something that is easily demonstrable in the lab. But I digress, and we won't go there. So at least not yet anyway. So let's move on now. So now we've got our solar system created. We got our planets whizzing around. We've got Halley's Comet, whizzing around the sun, doing its miraculous thing. And actually, John, why don't we talk about that really quick first before we start into the light thing? The whole Halley's Comet thing, and we've talked about this before, but people ask, well, how does Halley's Comet work? And okay, first of all, Halley's Comet has what is the 75-year orbital period? Is that correct?
75 and then 76. It alternates.
Okay.
Yep.
So we have 75 and 76-year cycles on Halley's Comet, and for whatever reason, we are asked to believe that as we are traveling, first of all, you have to keep in mind that even though the solar system is made and everything is working fine, we're still darting through space at an incredible amount of speed. We've got the Earth going around the sun at 66,000 miles an hour, the sun going around the Milky Way at over 500,000 miles an hour, and it just ramps up from there, right? So during all of this time and during all of this velocity, the sun is still able to have gravitational effect on Halley's Comet. And as Halley's Comet comes around, supposedly this alleged slingshot effect happens, where Halley's Comet gets close enough to the sun, but it doesn't get drawn directly to the sun. For whatever reason, it's skewed off to the side. And of course, the science will tell us that it's its velocity and its inertia on its original trajectory that is causing that to happen and not going to the sun. But okay, so we'll let that be another one of those miracle things that happens. But at that point, then as it goes past the sun, it's then drawn back by the sun's gravitational pull, and it loops around on the outside and then is ejected somehow back out into deep space. Now, again, why gravity wouldn't be affecting it still at that point is beyond me. But so now we have Halley's Comet going the other way from the sun, and remember, the sun is still traveling through the universe at over 500,000 miles an hour, or around the center of the Milky Way, right? And then 75 years later, it basically, or I guess 35, 37 years later, it gets to a point out at the edge of the solar system, which is what, around Pluto? Is that right, John?
Yeah, it's like, it goes out to a distance of allegedly 3.3 billion miles, and I think Pluto is allegedly 3.67 billion. So it's, like 90-something% of the way to Pluto, allegedly.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so again, another one of these miraculous things, and then it is somehow drawn back to the sun, and instead of being drawn directly back, this incredible distance directly at the sun, the center of the sun, which theoretically would be the highest gravitational pull, right? Once again, its trajectory is perfectly offset to the point where it just skims by the sun itself and then is magically turned around once again and then ejected back out into space. Have I covered it fairly well?
Yeah. And the craziest thing is, and actually, if I can, I'll share my screen because I've got a couple diagrams. I pulled them up.
Sure. Hang on a second. Let me stop my screen sharing.
You said it totally right. One of the things that I think is really miraculous about all orbital bodies, but especially like Halley's Comet, is that it supposedly maintains a perfect plane of orbit around the sun, or relative to the sun, which to me is fascinating and really just impossible because the sun is in a constant not rectilinear motion, but curvilinear motion around the galaxy, which is also in its own trajectory. So the whole thing is really sort of bizarre. And, globe heads will say that it's a fixed frame of reference. But again, when you're dealing with an object or two objects traveling in high velocities in opposite directions, they are no longer fixed to that overall frame of reference, especially with the galactic center, because again, you have this issue where the sun is the only body in the solar system large enough to reciprocate a gravitic relationship with the theoretical galactic center. And of course, Halley's Comet couldn't possibly be massive enough to do so. And so to say that Halley's Comet is compelled to maintain the frame of reference with the galaxy is just ridiculous. But and let's see here. Let me pull up how to
go ahead and show your Yeah, share your screen, and then I will present you after you've got it shared, so we don't give away our Hangout address here.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I am ready.
You are sharing? Okay,
Yeah,
so,
I think-
and then before you close that, John, let me know so I can stop sharing, because otherwise it'll reveal the address again. So,
Oh, no.
all right, I am now presenting you to everyone.
Okay, and I can't do what I was trying to do. So let's see here. First of all, okay, so here, this is what I thought was really interesting. This is the volume. Oh, crap. And it's going into a slide roll. If it does, I'll have to go back. Trying to go full screen. So this is like a volume density and velocity diagram for Pluto and Halley's Comet. It seems like kind of like boring stuff, but it's really interesting disproof of the heliocentric model. So Pluto, even though it's allegedly the smallest planet and the furthest planet, I don't even think they consider it a planet. It's like a planetoid because there's many hundreds of such size objects in the far reaches of the theoretical solar system. But even this tiny Pluto has a alleged volume of 1.5 billion cubic miles. So that is, whether you call it a planet or not, that's huge. And it's also pretty dense, almost 2 grams per cubic centimeter. And again, the average solar distance to Pluto is about 3.6 billion miles, allegedly, according to the heliocentric model. Now, its velocity is about 10,000 miles an hour, allegedly takes 250 years to orbit the sun. Now, on the other hand, you've got Halley's Comet, which by comparison, just in the volume, you can see, I mean, it's 167 cubic miles, allegedly, compared to Pluto, which is 1.5 billion cubic miles. I mean, there is no comparison. It's a microscopic compared to the planetoid Pluto. Also, according to scientifically accepted estimates, the density of Pluto is anywhere from just a small fraction of that of Pluto to maybe up to, maybe almost as dense as Pluto. But according to them, it is far less in volume, far less dense, and so therefore far less massive. And it couldn't possibly hold the mass enough in order to warp space-time enough to reciprocate the sun's gravity at such distances as Pluto. I mean, you can practically say the damn thing gets to Pluto because, again, we're talking about 3.3 billion miles in terms of its furthest, Halley's furthest from the sun, allegedly. And Pluto is, again, only 3.6 billion miles. So the idea that this comet, and I'll change slides here real quick if I can find the other one, escape. Bear with me. That's not it. Here. How do I go back? Let me just close this. It was here. So the ecliptic angles, this isn't really what's relevant, but this gives you sort of an idea. It's not really to scale, but this gives you an idea of what Halley's doing. Now, if this is our ecliptic plane, then the sun would be traveling like basically at a 60-degree angle to that. So, dang, I did not mean to do that. Sorry. At a 60-degree angle to our orbital plane. And so this really sort of cockamamie orbital plane of Halley's maintaining its perfect plane relative to the sun, even with all that motion of the sun, is just perplexing. I mean, if you try to animate something like this and then study the actions of the bodies, it's like there's no way gravity can be doing this because, just claiming that the object maintains the velocity of its host star and host galaxy throughout such wild trajectories, which, and velocities, is just ridiculous. I mean, the heliocentric model becomes really just so preposterous the more and more you look at things like Halley's Comet. But, of this information, the reason that this debunks gravity is because they claim that planets only orbit the sun due to their mass and velocity. So, for example, if you were to take Pluto, which is 1.5 billion cubic miles, and reduce it to the size and density of Halley's Comet, what would happen instantly is that Pluto would lose its orbital relationship with the sun, and it would begin to accelerate out and away into infinite space. And quite frankly, that's exactly what should happen to Halley's Comet, which is far, far smaller than Pluto, and it is also less dense, and it is also far faster, which is really not a good thing for Halley if it wants to turn back around in space and meet the sun. And again, the final point that you raise, and you're spot on, is that, yeah, if Halley could somehow make its way back to the sun, technically it should be heading directly towards the center of the sun. And really what it should do is, if it ever did catch up with the sun, it would simply crash into the center of it. It wouldn't come around the front of it and do a loop-de-loop and start this 75, 76-year cycle all over again. It's really just quite ridiculous. And and the fact that we have such cosmic interlopers as Halley's. And by the way, I did see it when I was, I think, 2 or 3, and I remember it vaguely. So it is a real thing, at least as far as I know in my experience. And so, but such cosmic interlopers just really disagree with the heliocentric model, and the only way that they can explain them away is by hoping that people don't get wise to the rules of gravity and relativity, if you will. Well, relativity in terms of relatively massive and low velocity objects comparatively to comets, even in the case of Pluto. So yeah, you can unshare. That was just my 2 little diagrams, but hopefully that helps with the visual and those numbers. Questions?
No, I think you pretty much covered it, and you're exactly right. That's one of the most amazing things, is that here we have an object that's much smaller than Pluto, traveling at a much higher velocity, and of course it's being somehow ejected away from the sun, and yet as it's moving away from the sun, for whatever reason, the sun's gravitational pull doesn't seem to have that much of an effect on it anymore, even though when it was in close proximity, it was, not only did it have a profound effect on it, but it was able to completely turn it around and shoot it back out the other side, which makes absolutely zero sense whatsoever. It's just crazy. And another thing that tells us is that if the sun commands that much of a gravitational field to be able to be, puppeteering Halley's Comet like the way that it is, that means that all the way out to the edge of the solar system and back, with all these thousands of satellites that we have, again, we should be able to measure some sort of field that is creating these gravitational effects, right? But no, again, it's completely imaginary, and they have to have these LIGO facilities here on Earth, which of course you have to wonder how that works, because if the Earth's gravitational field is the strongest thing that they're going to be detecting, then what is it about a gravitational wave that emanates over 4.5 billion light years away that would actually perturb the Earth's gravitational field? Again, makes no sense. We have these alleged gravitational fields all around us in every direction, causing all of these orbital dynamics and everything, and even Cavendish experiments. And for whatever reason, we cannot measure that field here. Again, we have to go back to a galaxy a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And this is just, this is the common sense that we're trying to appeal to people with. Yes, we do say it doesn't make sense a lot. And when you get that criticism a lot, well, just because, you don't understand it, and it doesn't make sense to you, doesn't mean that there is an explanation for it. All right, great. So the next time, we get another comment like that, I will put it upon the commenter to then explain precisely how this works.
Well, and in that context, I would say that it makes perfect sense that the model doesn't work. That would be my really short answer to that, because I say makes sense to save time, but I'll say this doesn't make sense. We say that a lot, but really to qualify that, what I mean is it makes perfect sense that this is not a working theory. I don't know if that makes a difference. Not to interrupt your train of thought, but just to be on the record on that one.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's the whole thing. We could say it doesn't make sense, or we could simply say this is absolute proof that the theory doesn't work. And I suppose maybe that's what we should be saying. Instead of saying it doesn't make sense or we don't understand it, we do understand it. We understand that it doesn't make any sense, and therefore, the theory simply doesn't work. And other than on mathematics, there is no demonstrable way to prove this ever. So again, we're being expected to accept all this stuff on faith, with absolutely zero demonstrable or empirical science to prove it. We're saying, oh, well, the empiricism's right in our observation of the planets and the stars up in the sky. Really? We don't even know what those are, other than, beyond lights. Nobody has ever proven, other than, by CGI and lies, and blatant poor lies at that, that these places are even actually physical places. So again, it's NASA builds thing, and mainstream science, like you say, builds one myth upon another myth upon another myth upon another myth. And, they've got a whole stack of myths put together, or assumptions that are unprovable, and they are using those as the scientific scientific groundwork, the framework to continue building on this ever more preposterous idea of gravitational forces in the solar system, right? No, it doesn't make sense, and by that term in itself, it is debunks it. Go ahead, Jaron.
I was just going to say it absolutely doesn't make any sense. And I think it was $1.2 billion was the cost of the entire LIGO project. And I started looking back because I'm starting to notice, just like you just said, that these clowns don't quit. If they get caught in one lie, they just wait a year or two and then come back with another one. And it's like constant, one after another. So I started thinking, okay, let me just start searching when they discover these things. Let me go search, because in Google, you can set a time and you can make sure that, so if they discover gravity waves, then you go search gravity waves before they discovered gravity waves, and you'll find the most incredible things. That they always do this. I mean, if you look up Alan Guth, is his name, just spelled like it sounds, and Guth, he won $1 million in 2014 for finding gravity waves, found a gravitational field, and won $1 million in a physics contest or something. So people just don't see it. And I always tell them, go back and search, go search 1990 to 1995 and put in Mars and water, and you'll see NASA coming out every other year with some report that there's water on Mars. It's just constant, because as long as you constantly keep the public thinking that, oh, they're discovering things, oh, they're getting new things, they're finding out things for us, well, then we just keep pumping money into their system. And that's why, the whole idea of government-sponsored science is the biggest scam going on right now. It's absolutely ridiculous. The fact that we wouldn't be able to, like you said, detect a force that's right here on Earth in the shed of Cavendish, that we have to wait until 100 years after it's proposed. That's not how science is supposed to work. We don't make a theory and everybody accept it, and then 100 years later, oh, now we proved it. How is that the scientific method?
It's not. And I've got some ears to the pavement, it would seem. And I'm being told that there's a channel streaming Glowbusters live right now talking schnaps. So just wanted to give a shout out and a thanks to $5,000 for Flat Earth Evidence. The name of the stream is called Flat Earth Globe Busted. So hello out there to all you guys. And if you want to listen to the real live stream, it's on Glowbusters. Sorry.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's going to be one of those things like the erectile dysfunction channel, one of those where they just sit there and go, oh, those guys are so stupid, they just don't understand anything. And they will not explain one iota of this. So if you clowns are out there actually trying to debunk us, let's hear some real viable explanations. Let's see some real evidence as to how you're going to prove us wrong. Otherwise, shut up.
Well,
right?
I really don't need nothing explained to me, because frankly, the whole Halley's Comet thing is theoretical in terms of how that works in the heliocentric theory, and theoretically it's been debunked. I mean, you have to concede either gravity or the existence of Halley's Comet in order to continue being a globe head. And I can vouch for Halley's Comet, so then what, are you going to get rid of gravity because it doesn't explain how a 144,000 mile per hour object at its fastest, just as it goes around the sun, could ever possibly turn around in space due to gravity nearly at the distance of Pluto? It simply doesn't work. The object wouldn't have the mass in order to reciprocate the sun's gravity. It would escape into space.
Yep, that's absolutely true. So, okay, so let's move on from these, multitude of fantasies that we have discussed so far that nobody has any proof for, let alone a bunch of idiots on a hangout trying to debunk what we're saying here. So, you guys knock yourself out. Keep trying. So, all right, so now let's get to, after we have gotten this complete fantasy land, solar system model or universe model created and built, now we have to go back to the beginnings of life on Earth, starting with the primordial ooze of, a chemical concoction that all of a sudden became alive, right? All right, so now that this has happened and we have the first organisms that have come into existence, and supposedly the amoeba or the cells or whatever, and they then continue to evolve, and they turn into other creatures, and they turn into other creatures. Isn't it amazing that science has never shown any evolution of any creature ever? We see slight adaptations to environment. Absolutely, that's true, and it absolutely is possible, and it does happen that there are adaptations. But as far as actual metamorphosis into other species, there's no way that has ever been proven. It simply doesn't happen. It can't happen. And even the scientists, the geneticists that have made biological modifications to certain plants or animals, they have found that within 2 to 3 to 4 generations, without any further manipulations of the genetics of the organism, that it reverts back to its original genetic composition. Okay. So again, there is something that is absolutely intelligent in this design that is not meant to be changing other than, by small adaptations and change of environment. But as far as entire species, not a chance. So now we've gotten to the point where, we're up the evolutionary chain to the point where, before humans become humans and they're essentially apes, right? Well, actually, we should go back a little bit before that. Let's go back to the chicken and the egg, right, John? So we have another one of those conundrums that, okay, so what happened first? If the chicken was evolved first, okay, great. Then, once it evolved, then there had to be a mated pair, right? There had to be a rooster. There had to be a male opposite. And that same goes for every species, right? Before anything could be continued to propagate the species, right? So somehow, by absolute chance, right, the hen also, comes with the rooster, and bada bing, out of this primordial ooze and through this process of continual evolution, which nobody has ever been able to prove, demonstrate, even find any fossil record for that was legitimate. Now all of a sudden, nature, for whatever reason, by this complete happenstance, has created the sexes, has created this need for male and female and this dualistic type of nature throughout the universe, right? Or throughout the world. And we don't know what's out in the universe, but throughout the world. And again, complete poppycock. We have things that we can't even explain. They can't even explain, different Rh blood types, as to why, some people seem to have rhesus monkey genes in them and some people don't. And, it goes on and on and on. The anomalies are endless, but was
that a poop throwing reference, or am I got my mind in the gutter?
Could be. It could be. So yeah, again, people, once again, we are being asked to, to believe this by Charles Darwin and his chimpanzee scientists since then, that this is actually what's happening, again, with absolutely zero proof whatsoever, that this is happening. So now we've taken this complete lie from the Big Bang all the way up to, how our species are created, and how it's just some fortunate happenstance that now we need the sexes and the animals and the plants, and all this fabulous amount of life and genetics that are going on around us is just an accident.
If you just look at what science demands of you, that you have to believe in the moon landings, you have to believe in evolution, that's what's so funny for these science backers that will get so upset when you tell them that they believe in a religion, and they'll throw up their hands and they'll pout and everything because it's not a religion, it's nothing like a religion, when it's everything like a religion. When you've got a dogma that has to be adhered to, or else you're shunned, or else you're pushed out, excommunicated, that is a religion. And that's what science has become. Because when you've got something like evolution that is so clearly false, Bob, you just explained it well, exactly why it is, but there's so many other reasons. People will always go back to that. You don't understand billions of years. You don't understand billions of years. Okay, well, let's go with 67 million years, which is supposedly the date that the dinosaurs went extinct. So in 67 million years, because the only thing left would have been a gerbil, the size of a gerbil, that evolved into a human being from 67 million years ago. That is the most ridiculous belief that you could ever have. Think of an elephant. An elephant came from a gerbil. Basically, that's what happened in 67 million years. Everything you see around you had to evolve in 67 million years. It's such a joke that anybody would believe those kind of nonsense when there is no evidence. There's not one shred of anything changing to another species. And Bob, you said it perfect. If you just think about when, let's say, apes are evolving into humans. Well, let's say that one evolves into a human. Well, then it needs to have a pair. So if it's a male, then you need to have another female that evolves at the same time to become a female, ready to be, pregnant. And then those two need to be living so close together that they mate, and they have another one. Well, then who does the other one come from? Now you've got a problem again, because now you've got to have that same thing that just happened. The impossibility of that happening needs to have happened again, and also close enough so that they have another baby. It's just nonsense. I don't know how anybody believes it.
Yeah. And the dogma involved is such that it's not even like where they expect you to adhere to it, but if you even question it, which is really a shame, because that's really what science is to begin with, is questioning, established beliefs. That's the fundamental purpose of science. And I think that I still hold a high regard and respect for science, but not for the theoretical sciences, being, whether it's theoretical physics or biology or quantum physics or whatever. a lot of this stuff, including evolution, is really just it's theory based on bias, beliefs that people, confirmation bias sort of situation. People want to believe something, and so they'll set out to prove it. And in terms of evolution, yeah, there's no, and I think even Darwin himself basically stated that with the theory of evolution in play, if they didn't find what you would call something like intermediary species after a decade or certainly after 50 years, even by just sheer happenstance, not even looking for it, then the theory of evolution is pretty much debunked, because that was one of the major predictions, is that you'd see intermediary species. Now, I think a lot of people, including Darwin, mistook gene expression for evolution, because gene expression definitely exists, depending on the environment that you're in, or depending on, specific breeding practices or genetic manipulation. You can have different gene expression, but and that would consist of things like we've talked about, like domesticated pigs. If you let them out in the wild, within a few weeks, they'll turn into a wild boar. They'll totally change their physiology and attitude. If you, like the Galapagos Islands, if for however long, for hundreds of years, you have species that are cut off from their kin and put into a specific environment, then they're going to have different gene expressions than their cousins. But at the end of the day, we've never seen anything like an intermediary species, and without direct gene manipulation, there's no evidence for evolution, even according to Darwin himself. So I think it's time we look at other options.
Yeah. Or again, go back to the idea that, hey, maybe everything was created by a single intelligent source, or even by, multiple intelligent sources. And I'm certainly not saying that the creation story in the Bible is 100% true. It could be, but it also may not be. I mean, there are a lot of other possibilities, but I will say this: the creation story in the Bible, at least, first of all, is acknowledged to be, part of a religious belief. However, it is much more plausible that that's actually the way that things happened than this entire fantasy story that science has concocted for us, starting from the Big Bang forward. It seems much more likely, and if you put it to an Occam's razor scenario, there is no doubt which one makes more sense. It is so obvious, right? And
even
for those,
with his quote here, he says, "To suppose that the eye, with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection, seems, I freely confess, absurd to the highest degree." So, I mean, even Darwin saw the absurdness in his idea. But later in that same chapter of that book, he explains that he believed it evolved anyway, and that the absurdity was just an illusion. But we've discovered enough about the eye since then to even prove it more, that your eye is absolute proof, and so is every other part of your body. I mean, you just think of the sexual reproductive organs. How can they evolve? How do you have offspring if you're in the middle of an evolution? Or how did they be, it's everything. You look at everything. How can people were blind, or, animals were blind until their eyes developed? And it's just nonsense, all of it.
Yeah, all of it. Absolutely. And yet we're called crazy because we believe in something a little, different than that actually makes a lot more sense. Who's the crazy ones?
Science, Bob. Don't ever question science.
No, heaven forbid. We wouldn't want to do that, even though they can't even answer it.
I wouldn't even say that I have any beliefs other than I totally know for a fact that evolution's wrong. And, to me, for some people that may prove a creator, and I think that that's certainly good evidence for it. But to me, it's good enough to say for 100% certain that evolution, couldn't possibly be a thing, or we'd have evidence for it. And sure, we can tinker around with apparent DNA and, crossbreed things and using, various means. I mean, if you look at Monsanto, they do everything from I looked at Roundup Ready corn and how they did that. They literally shot spider DNA with corn DNA and all kinds of weird stuff. It was really, really kind of bizarre. But there's that. And then there's stuff that's as harmless as, just sort of crossbreeding to make hybrid plants, which are better. But in terms of evolution, people will call you crazy if you question it or argue against it. But frankly, there's just too much evidence that goes against it. Like you mentioned, how could the eye have formed as a process of evolution? How could our, which came first, our blood or our hearts? Which came first, the blood or the blood vessels? Which came first, the food or the internal organs? I mean, if you're talking about full-scale evolution, you're talking about something as simple as a single-celled organism ultimately turning into every sort of animal that's ever lived. And to me, it's just it's an interesting theory. But like Darwin said, we would have found ample supporting evidence in terms of intermediary species, which were, that would be something that is in between two different species, in the evolutionary cycle.
Yeah, absolutely true. So, to his credit, I guess Darwin ultimately kind of admitted that, that there were some problems, much like Einstein, before he passed away, basically came to the conclusion and admission that, his idea of this materialistic universe, he just was never able to prove it. In other words, he was never able to understand, the spooky action at a distance, and yet it's been proven time and time and time again. So, everything is not, nuts and bolts screwed together, and there is a perfect logical train of operation, to everything that we see. So many things are inexplicable because there are many things that go far beyond, just the mechanical concept of the Earth, right?
And when these guys question it, when the very, inventor of the theory questions himself, and yet it goes on and on throughout 100 years of people believing it and being taught in educational centers and universities, it should make anybody shocked that when we just are questioning, hey, why is this getting pushed forward as a fact when it's not? Even the very inventor of it never said it. And people they are shocked that we'll question it. This is that quote I think you might be talking about that Einstein wrote to a friend when he said, "I consider it quite possible that physics cannot be based on the field concept, i.e. on continuous structures. In that case, nothing remains of my entire castle in the air, gravitational theory included, and the rest of modern physics." And that's from a letter that he wrote from Subtle as the Lord by Abraham Pais. So, these things are things that even they recognize, I might be wrong on this. It's just an idea. And yet this body of science grabbed it, ran forward with it, and built an entire universe on faulty foundations. It's pretty sad. I've heard Lawrence Krauss say that the great thing about science is that science never says things are facts, and that they're always open to new evidence, and how much scientists love to be proven wrong and love to get new information. And not more than 3 sentences later say evolution is a fact. It is a fact. It cannot be questioned. No ifs, ands, or buts. It's a fact. And anybody who can say that in a paragraph can't even look at themselves in the mirror, in my opinion.
Well, and what's so funny about it too is that really, if you look at the historical record that is being sort of covered up, it would appear by like the Smithsonian and other groups, but it appears that we're actually devolving. And whether that's a physiological, gene expression, I don't know. It seems as if the terrain has changed a bit. So like based on some pretty legitimate science, like core samples of the Arctic ice and stuff, where they can get an idea of the atmospheric condition and such to some degree of accuracy, dating back pretty far, it appears that there was a higher oxygen content, there was stronger electromagnetic fields and stronger barometric pressure at some point in the past. And we already know through experiment that causes natural giantism, basically. It'll cause animals to grow much larger, live longer. And so, the whole idea of evolution really kind of goes out the window if you realize that we're getting stupider and smaller as the, thousands of years go by or whatever. If the phenomenon of sort of prehistoric giants is indeed a thing, which I think that it actually is.
Yeah, I agree. I think so too. And even in your video that you did last week, you showed the pictures of a lot of these archaeological digs that they're finding these immense, huge humans that are ranging from 10 to 60 feet and even taller. They're digging up, they're unearthing the remains of these things. And yeah, it doesn't surprise me that, with more oxygen content that things would tend to be bigger, in our past. And in fact, science has admitted that there was considerably higher concentrations of oxygen several thousand years ago. So that doesn't surprise me. Now, as far as dinosaurs, though, I've never really been able to buy into that one. If dinosaurs existed, and that's a big if, which I doubt, it certainly wasn't millions of years ago. If there were any type of larger lizard species, that it was likely, in the thousands of years ago, and that being commensurate with evidence, viable evidence that we found and demonstrable evidence, then it's entirely possible that we could have had very large lizards. But whether or not they come up with these crazy crazy-looking species like the brontosaurus, and certain other highly unlikely types of dinosaurs, I have a hard time buying into that one. But I think that not a lot of people buy into dinosaurs, right?
No, not at all. No.
Yeah. So
I mean, it seems there were giant creatures back then, like, and we still have them lingering around in the form of like great white sharks and crocs and alligators. They are pretty much, according to science, and who knows, right? But according to them, that those sort of animals have been around, genetically speaking, for a very, very long time, and there does appear to be records, legitimate records of giant, shark type creatures and giant alligator type creatures. And this falls right in line with exactly the same thing. If humans were once giants getting smaller, is that the conditions on Earth changed, and so the Earth simply won't support giant life as it did at some point in the past. And I don't think it was millions of years ago. And the whole thing with dinosaurs is just so convenient. They had a theory about dinosaurs, went to go dig them up, and lo and behold found dinosaurs, and a lot of them appear to be fake forgeries. And even if you go to the museum to see them, you're looking at paper mache, buildings, so constructions. So
hey Bob, if you want to do something fun, if you just search dinosaurs, just search that and then go to images. Sometimes Miss and I will just go just to laugh, because when you look at the images that they have sold us on that people think are real or that ever existed, it's probably the funniest thing you've ever seen. Some of these images are hilarious. They're animals that could not possibly have existed. Just go to images and start, going through them. Up there. And you'll see, click that green picture there, which, these may be for kids, but this is what they're teaching children. This is why people believe in dinosaurs, is because, no, the one in the middle that has all the picture of dinosaurs, the green one, like it has a green, neon green background. Even that picture is hilarious, but every picture is funny.
Oh, that one. Okay.
Look at the one down here, the little light purple one with a horn coming out of its side. That's
that's likely.
Yeah. And what is this one over here that has like a rock on its tail? Has on the left side, there's like two rocks sitting on its tail. Like it could whip people with its rock tail. It's just nonsense. Keep going down and just
dinosaur testicles. That's got to be it.
I was going to say, you got a lot of junk in the trunk.
This kind of reminds me of those. You were showing this a few weeks ago to us after the show, Jaron, that all the weird ass species that they're claiming there were. What was that?
Oh man,
that's something that
video on that. That is so funny. It was like top 10 animals, extinct animals. And the funniest thing is the video, you're watching it and you're thinking it's a joke. But the funnier thing is, if you go to Wikipedia, every single animal that they name is in Wikipedia as if it was real. It was an actual animal and it's like megalodon, and it'd just be some huge ass shark with like a razor blade mouth. It is so nonsense. Look at that dinosaur up there. It's got that weird like orange slice on his head. What is that? These things are just why would anybody believe that? It's just so funny. It's not. And people, flat earth math is the big one. You'll always tell me, Jaron, you're talking about things you don't understand. You can't question. You're looking like a fool because you're questioning things you don't understand. Oh, I don't need to understand that dinosaurs. I don't need to understand. I know that there's not one example of a full skeleton of dinosaur bones. That's impossible. When you start looking at that and then you just go back to its origins, Eric Dubé's done an excellent video on it. Go back and look at the way that it went through from its origins, and you'll see that there was a big contest between different people. And, I found this. Oh, I found this. Oh, I found this species. Hundreds of species at a time being found, and all based off of an ear bone. What is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. What you should have asked him, what I would have asked him, Jaron, first of all, is, well, Charles, do you understand it?
Well, he will go ask a paleontologist and then wonder how in the hell he could ever be deceived.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, it's amazing how often we're told, well, we just don't understand. It's like, well, then you explain it, and explain it in a way that's coherent and that makes sense and that actually has some proof behind it, some evidence behind it, other than rampant speculation from the get-go, like how the origin of everything came about from the silly-ass Big Bang, right? And everything that has come forth since then.
Or people say, how do you question science like this? Like, where do you think your computer came from? Well, I'll tell you what, it didn't come from dinosaurs with orange slices on their head. That's where my computer
right.
Well, hey, for all you know, his prey had a vitamin C deficiency, so it was a hunting tactic.
Look at this one.
Looks like a half dinosaur, and half parrot.
Oh man,
what is this thing? Look at all these different faces. Oh man.
Scroll up a little bit, Bob. Yeah. I just saw one that.
Hey, that's the Buttheadosaurus.
There's a dinosaur bird over there on the left. That's pretty. The one in the creek there.
This one.
Yeah, Dino Bird.
Yeah, they have got some. I got to give them credit. They have got some pretty active imaginations, because how they could extrapolate, pull these sediments and these alleged bones or whatever from the ground that 6 million years later, and be able to put together without any living cells or any DNA samples or anything like that. These concoctions is simply beyond me. But unfortunately, this is the level of stupidity, that people have gotten to. They will believe, or gullibility, I should say, that they will believe anything like this because some clown in a white jacket tells you it's so.
Well, it's not. Oh, go ahead.
You were taught it in kindergarten, so it's kind of unfair because I know I believed it too. Because why would you question things that are taught to you in science class and you've been explained the scientific method? You have no reason to question it. Real quick, Miss and I one time tried to look for a picture of a Tyrannosaurus sitting, which you'll not find because the way that they've constructed the body.
No rest for the wicked, as they say.
Nope, guess not.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say too. Well, not about that, but in terms of people not necessarily being gullible, but we're just lambasted with all of this science fiction propaganda, and it's presented to us, pretty repeatedly throughout our lives as science fact. And then you have it's really quite romantic when you start getting into the Jurassic Park movies, which were very well done, and children love them. I've got a nephew who is really, really, really into dinosaurs, and it's not like that was something that he came up with on his own. It's shoved down our throats, and it's presented to us in sort of a action environment, very romantic sort of way, and so it draws us in. It draws in our imagination, and frankly, it's fascinating, the thought of dinosaurs. But yeah, in terms of evidence-wise, it does appear that we've been tricked, and you'll get called crazy for saying it, but the proof's in the pudding. Just show me the evidence for dinosaurs, especially 60 million years extinct, because weren't there a couple of scientists who allegedly found some active DNA in a alleged dinosaur bone?
Yeah, and then they get fired.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not allowed to do that. Because then they say that it would be carbon dated, and they say we're not going to carbon date that because carbon dating only goes up to like 50,000 years max, and yet it would come back less than that. That's why they know.
Whoops, sorry.
That's why they know they can't carbon date it. And also just on the gravity thing, Bob, I did drop a link there. It's from one of Mark Sargent's recent videos that is so hilarious because there's a caller at a radio show that calls in. And he's talking flat earth the whole time. It's like a 22-minute video, but I just put it right at the end there at 22 minutes or 20 minutes because this girl that's there is so upset because she has a friend who was a rocket scientist and he sends rockets to space, and this guy starts questioning gravity, and then watch what she says. It is classic. I'm sure Mark doesn't mind if we play it.
I'm sure he doesn't. Okay, let's go ahead and play it. And let me know if you don't hear it, because I've been having little problems.
So the theory of gravity tends to be, it's based on mass. That's our belief that mass exerts a force that we see as gravity.
Absolutely.
If the Earth were flat and thin, how does that, or does that just mean our measurements are off?
No, flat earthers don't really. The main flat earth thing is we don't really believe in gravity.
Okay.
Gravity is not pulling everything to the center of a ball like a basketball would pull water and land to it. It's just a flat, motionless plane, and what makes it, it's density and buoyancy. So like a helium balloon goes up, but we're kept on the ground. Everything else is kept on the ground. It's
Why?
more dense. So if you drop a brick in water, it goes all the way down. Why? Because it's more dense. Why does the balloon go up if there's gravity?
But isn't that the whole point of?
It's lighter than air.
Yeah, it's lighter. It's weight. It's the weight's getting pulled down.
It's less dense than air, so it goes up. What do you need gravity for?
I've never been asked that question, I can honestly say.
So I've got another question. I've got another question.
Everything's denser.
How do you explain magnets, though? Two magnets that stick together, that's not a gravitational pull?
That's a magnetic.
That's just two dense things happening.
That's what the world is. That's what the world probably goes on. I don't have it. I don't have every answer. I'm just looking for
So,
all this.
Rex, I've got another question for you. We're almost out of time for the hour. Are the other planets in the solar system also flat?
Wouldn't know to what they are.
Is there
However,
a theory?
they're probably supposedly not spherical terra firma planets that you can land on. Like when Matt Damon flies to Mars, that's all propaganda. That can't happen.
That was a movie like Tom Sawyer.
I understand what you're saying.
A-Team.
Yeah, I understand.
I know it's a movie and it's not happened yet. I know that. I'm just saying that's all propaganda.
Question,
we all accept the mission to Mars when it happens in 10 years.
My question was, if the Earth is flat, why are the other planets not?
Why are the other planets not?
Yes.
The other planets aren't like we understand them as planets that you can like land on and stuff. But
Rex, thank you for the call. This is
oh my God. Okay.
Wow. Don't even let him finish the freaking answer.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Magnets.
Yeah, magnets. Yeah, magnets. Well, magnets go a lot further, or electromagnetic or electrostatic force goes way further in explaining, this idea of gravity than anything else. And it's not even that it has anything to do with gravity as we're taught it. Basically, the buoyancy and density argument works very well. But, like I've said many times before, there is still something that determines up from down. And, as I believe and many other physicists believe, not the least of which would be Wal Thornhill of the Thunderbolts project, that it is a static dipole effect that is essentially that potential of up from down is set by the natural electrostatic charge of the Earth plane itself. And, commensurate with that, if the Earth is indeed some sort of an electric circuit, then the anode, the cathode would be the Earth. And we know that the Earth has this static field, even by mainstream physics, that is measured at 100 volts per meter, going up to at least 50 kilometers, right? Which gives us a minimum static potential or average of 5 million volts. Now, obviously, as weather fronts move in and out, conductivity of atmosphere changes, that potential will rise and fall, and you will have dips in that potential when there is a static discharge of lightning, or you have sprites or elves that are discharging up and hitting something up there that would, likely be akin to a firmament. And again, this is something that, at least in the flat Earth model with some sort of covering or dome, whether it's a dome or whether it's just a continuous plane of something, there is something up there that is giving us a charge potential between the Earth itself and whatever is up there above us, a firmament or not. Okay, that at least makes sense in so many ways that where the ball Earth model just completely fails. So again, we can demonstrate this charge potential all day long. Static electricity, there's virtually nothing that it does not have an effect on. It has an effect on wood, plastic, paper, biological material, everything. And why does it? Because everything is made up of these little charged particles, whether or not you want to accept that they are actually atomic structures, with a nucleus being made of protons and neutrons and orbiting electrons, whether you want to look at it that way or not. The bottom line is that everything still has a charge, and it is this charge potential that is giving us our up from down in this model. After that potential is sets this framework, then the buoyancy and density argument takes over. And again, this is 100% demonstrable in a lab, whereas gravity is not. So really, who's got the better theory here, right? And not only that, when you look at what mainstream science has done with gravity, we're taking this 9.8 meters per second squared gravitational constant that, we are measuring on Earth as an acceleration, by the way, not a force, but an acceleration. And we are trying to apply it to everything that we're observing in the rest of the universe. Well, guess what? That doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Well, because obviously we really don't know what these quote unquote gravitational parameters are out in the cosmos. And in fact, when you apply these same gravitational parameters that we're observing here on Earth to the rest of the cosmos, it doesn't work. So what do they have to do in that case? Well, then they have to invent dark matter, right? And all these other, strange phenomenons that, once again, we can prove none of in order to bolster their theory. Where, once again, when it comes back to the simple electric universe model, and I mean in the flat electric universe model, not necessarily the one that the Thunderbolts promotes, which is far more accurate and far more plausible even than the mainstream heliocentric centric model. But when you get back to, what we're describing about the Earth having a cathode and anode and a static charge in between it, and, we can measure the static potential at 100 volts per meter on average all the way up, at least we've got a demonstrable model, in that particular area instead of a bunch of wild speculation, right?
Yeah. Density and buoyancy works, to a degree to explain what goes up must come down. Now, if you're talking to someone sharp who knows their physics, and that chick there was about as sharp as a ladle, but in normal cases, if you're discussing this with someone, they're going to tell you, well, you still need gravity in order for density and buoyancy to work, and that's not true. You merely need a tendency for higher density objects to naturally find a place at rest towards the ground. And yeah, I totally agree with you that it's the static electric charge of the Earth itself that gives it that nudge, and that's really all you need is a nudge. And I believe that's why they call gravity such a very weak force, because it doesn't really even in their model, it doesn't cause apples to fall from trees. That's really handed more towards the density and buoyancy as well. Gravity is merely that nudge for where high density and low density objects find their place of rest naturally. Yes. And so yeah, it really does explain it very well. And I don't know how much more stuff you've got to cover, but that sort of relates to something that I've been looking at here recently. I wanted to run by you guys, so I'll just make a note of it and I'll bring it back up again once we've gotten through everything that you wanted to cover. Okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no problem.
All right.
So yeah. Oh crap, where was I?
Gravity, density, buoyancy, electrostatic charge, 100 volts.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, what I was going to say is the electric static force is a very weak force, right? The electrostatic attraction is very weak. We know that. You can rub a balloon on your hair and you can put it next to a water stream and it will draw it over to it. But again, that's only in very close proximity. But in the grand scheme of things, electric static force is very, very weak. And again, that's the only thing that is required to tip the scales, so to speak, pardon the pun, in being able to give us what is actually up from down. And from that point forward, density and buoyancy absolutely explain everything. From liquids, gases, everything follows this exact same parameters. And again, so even when you get into the idea, well, what about a hydrogen or helium balloon? Why does it float up? Well, look at the atomic structure of hydrogen and helium, right? And this goes back again into the dielectric theory that Walt Thornhill and many other physicists have proposed as being the actual cause of what we're perceiving as gravity. That makes so much more sense, and it's so much more demonstrable. It is demonstrable in a lab. Gravity is not, unless you're Neil deGrasse Tyson and you take a microphone and drop it on the floor and go, gravity, bitches. And that's about the best they can do. Sorry, not good enough. So yeah, pretty crazy stuff.
Well, in order to have Einsteinian gravity, you'd have to have Earth curvature, and there isn't. So there.
Yeah, that's another problem. It's never been measured. And of course, try as they might, they try and debunk us with every other possibility out there. But let's face it, curvature never has been measured. What we see on, some of these long 150 mile sites that we see is impossible in the Ball Earth model. And yet where are the ballers doing their experiments? They sit there and they criticize everything that we do, but where are their experiments where they're actually showing that there is curvature? They don't have any. And there is nothing that we have not been able to counteract with actual demonstrable models. Like for example, what Rob Skiba has done to show how perspective works and to show how our visual angular resolution on our visual acuity works, right? We have gone and we have explained that. The ballers have done nothing but just stick to the mainstream line, and that's all they can do is parrot it. That's all they can do. They have nothing to prove otherwise. So, and this is another thing that David, that I want to talk about too here as well. And this is the idea of, it kind of goes back to a video that I saw, several months ago, and I wish I could find it because it was really excellent. But the idea is that they're talking about, certain stars that are in our solar system, whether it's Proxima Centauri or whatever, and how we're looking at our sun, right? And our sun is supposedly, 864,000 miles across, right? And yet in a mere 8 light minutes, right, it has been reduced to the size that we see it in the sky, which, is pretty small, especially when you think about if something the size of 864,000 miles across was within 1,000 miles of it, we wouldn't be able to see anything but that, period, right? So we back it off to a minuscule distance, cosmologically speaking, of 8 light minutes, and it has been reduced to something that is absolutely tiny in the sky. And as David is doing with Paige in this video right here, she's only going back not even 100 yards, and look at the angular resolution. Look at how much smaller it gets in a very rapid amount of time. Well, this video that I'm referencing, and I will find it eventually, did all the math and all the calculations about how this is simply impossible. In fact, we had a guy that we all know really well, named Sharif Shalan, that wrote a comment that I'm going to read it because I thought it was excellent, Sharif. And what he says is, thanks, Bob, for making me think about this. Our sun, at the size it appears in the sky, is supposedly 864,575 miles in diameter and is 8 light minutes away from Earth. Supposedly, the next closest star, Proxima Centauri, is only 124,274 miles in diameter and is 4.24 light years away. It is 7 times smaller and over 278,000 times further away than our sun, or 25 trillion miles. And hey, David Weiss just joined us. So he says, my question is this: how can something 7 times smaller than our sun and over 278,000 times further away even be visible at all? The answer: it can't. According to known human visual acuity calculations, an object with a radius of 124,274 miles would cease to be visible to the human eye beyond 372,822,000 miles, about 0.0014 or 167,000th of the alleged distance of 25 trillion miles. Yet we are told that at that distance, Proxima Centauri is visible on a clear night with the naked eye. It would appear that the size and distance numbers we are given as fact are wildly theoretical and not the result of actual measurement or based on reality at all. Amen, Sharif. You're absolutely right. Hey, David, how you doing?
Hey, guys, how's it going?
Pretty good. We're just showing off your girlfriend here.
I was commenting hot chick in the video.
No doubt, right?
So yeah, that's there's so many things I've been thinking about where a single proof proves that we don't live on a spinning ball. I think I used the example the other day. I'm trying to come up with something better. If there was 7 video cameras and one of them saw a car crash through the front of a building and the other ones were blocked by something or whatever, it doesn't matter. One of them saw it and there's your proof. You don't need to look at all of these other things. And the fact that the sun, we've all seen the model of the sun next to the earth, it's the size of a house next to the size of marble, you move it, 8 light minutes away because, 93 million miles, and it's literally the size of a dime or a quarter held at arm's length. What happens if you double that distance or 8 times that distance? It's not even fathomable that you'd be able to see it. And that's a light hour, which the human mind can't even conceive of that distance. But we're talking about thousands of light years. We're seeing other suns. And then on top of that, they're telling us that planets passing in front of this are dipping that light and we're able to measure it and say that there's inhabitable worlds there is utter nonsense. I mean, first, for that to even happen, it has to be on the exact plane that we're looking at, that those planets are going in front of that star. It's such nonsense. It keeps me up at night.
Yeah, I thought the same thing too, because I'm familiar with how they claim to discover these planets. It's by the dimming of the star that's being transited by the planet from our vantage point. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That would mean that their orbital ecliptic or whatever orbital path they're on would have to be aligned to our line of sight, which is the odds of that happening by chance are like 1 in, I don't even know. It's very unlikely.
It's complete and total nonsense. And you guys were talking before about Halley's Comet and, all of these bodies, whatever they are, they're lights in the sky as far as I'm concerned, because we have no other proof of what exactly they are. But they're all coming in on a plane. If the heliocentric model was true, the magical gravity of the sun that can reach out all the way to Halley's Comet at its farthest point would be grabbing things from all different angles, and they'd be coming around like the model of an atom that we see with all the electrons flying around. But that's not what we see. Everything comes in from the south, from the over the flat plane. That right there says something's wrong.
Yeah.
I got to ask Dave, is that medicine ball so you can get things out of the cupboard that are up high?
That's not a medicine ball. It's a very light ball, and Paige uses it as a desk, a chair, so she doesn't slouch or whatever.
Yeah, Kemi had one of those too. They're actually kind of cool.
Yeah, no, they're good. They keep you using your core a little bit when you're sitting doing nonsense, like like viewing YouTube videos and hanging out on Hangouts.
Yeah,
hard work.
And David, the one thing that you just covered only, in that demonstration that you did is a demonstration of our limits of angular resolution. All right, there's still another factor to this, and that is, like I said, the light intensity. Which must obey the inverse square law, just like anything else. And again, if all stars are essentially more or less the same type of thermonuclear reactions, which they're not, and our own sun, I think, proves that beyond any reasonable doubt, because you cannot see. Well, there's just a lot of reasons. We'll go into that later. I don't want to digress too far. But the point is that there is a certain amount of light intensity that are being generated by these suns, whether they're enormous, 1,000 times the size of our sun, or a tenth the size of our sun. They are putting out a specific light intensity, and that light intensity is not brighter necessarily on the stars that are really, really far away. And yet they would have us believe that, basically, if you have a 100-watt light bulb, at 100 miles away, but it was, I don't know, the size of a balloon, right? Versus a small 100-watt balloon, if they're putting out essentially the same amount of lumens, per square inch on what's on them, they still are going to have a finite amount of distance that they can travel. And when you start getting into the idea that these beams of light, or this intensity of light, can actually traverse thousands of light years and still arrive here at the brightness that they are, is preposterous.
It's nonsense. And people say, do you have any proof of this? Yeah, I have proof. Get one of those, 2 million, 4 million candlelight spotlights that, use on a boat or something, and shine it in someone's face from 5 feet away. All right, they're going to put their hands up, and you'll be lucky if they don't give you a beating. But as they back up, moving away, you literally get 100 feet away. You can stare at the thing. Go 1,000 feet away, and it's just another light. Go a mile away, and it becomes a pinpoint. And soon you won't even be able to see it. Can you explain for the people that don't understand what the inverse square law is when it comes to light coming from a star or another source?
Well, actually I can. Let me bring this up. I've got this already queued up. Let's just bring this up. So basically, what the inverse square law is you have a source, okay? And as you move away from the source, as the beam diverges, okay, and even if it is a focused beam like a laser, it is still going to have a factor of divergence, period. Nothing retains its precision beam width, not RF, not light, not anything. But as you move it further away, and it's calculated essentially in meters. So if you go 1 meter away, you're going to decrease the light intensity by an inverse commensurate amount, right? So, and then if you go 2 meters away, then you've got 2 meters, but it's decreased by a factor of 4, as you can see, because it's got to cover 4 times the area. If you go 3 meters away, it's squared, then you've got 9 squares of area that it's got. In other words, that intensity of that beam is becoming less dense and less bright, or less and less intense. And that is exactly what we're talking about. Now, stars theoretically are an omnidirectional source, right? Or they would be, they radiate in all directions. So it's not even a focused beam of light like a laser. So even, if you use the example of a laser, where we can take a 1-watt laser and hold it, a couple feet away from something and burn a hole right through it, right? But yet you can hold a piece of paper up and outside in the sun won't burn a hole through it. But if you've got that columnated energy of a laser beam, and you take that laser beam and you move it away a mile or 2 miles or something like that, not only is the beam going to diverge on a columnated focused light wave, but it's no longer going to be able to burn holes in things because of it has lost its intensity. And at some point, a few miles away, you're not even going to be able to see that light beam anymore. So there's a really good example right there, comparing a laser beam, which is a coherent light source, versus the sun, which is an incoherent light source. And yet somehow these sun rays are able to travel thousands of light years, which is numbers, in the hundreds of trillions of miles. It just gets ridiculous. It's not possible. Again, use your common sense, people. Do some of these experiments.
The problem, Bob, is people can't comprehend what a light year is, or let alone thousands or millions of them. We're talking, the sun, 8 times the distance is a light hour. Okay. An hour is nowhere near a year. It's not even near a week or a day. It's insane when you start looking at it. I tried to make a scale online of what a light hour versus a light year versus, 100 light years. You can't even make the scale.
Yeah.
I mean, at least I can't.
And Darren, you dropped this link. What were you going to say about it?
Yeah, just there's a little portion of this video where I explain the inverse square law when it comes to the moon, and the fact of how bright we see it from Earth and how bright we would see it in the moon landing footage. And I put it right from the start. I think it should be right there. Maybe it's a little bit.
All right. So I'll go ahead and play this. And how long should I play for? Just a couple? Well, until it explains it, right?
You'll see me. Yeah, I'm just explaining the moon.
Okay. All right. Let's give it a listen.
Per unit area.
Exactly. See how that shit works, Chisholm? When you actually pay attention to the definition of the inverse square law?
All right. A lot of name calling, a lot of laughing, a lot of hee-haw, knee slapping. Let's take a look at this. Okay. We're going to look at 240,000 miles distance from the moon. We're here on Earth. And from this distance, we'll say that we have 1,000 lumens of brightness. Okay. We go half the distance in our little rocket ship. We're now 120,000 miles from it. And 4 times the brightness means we're now 4,000 lumens brightness. And again, we can see the whole entire moon. Okay. Let's go a little bit further in our rocket ship. Now we're at 60,000 miles from the moon, and we 4 times it again. So we're at 16,000 lumens, and we can see the entire moon. Correct? Scientism folk? All right, let's continue. Now let's break it all the way down and go to 30,000, 15,000, 7,500, 3,750, 1,875, and stop at 937 miles from the moon. We would see the entire moon, okay? The lumens would be 65,536,000, okay? Divide both those by 1,000, and the moon should be 65,536 times as bright when you're looking at the entire moon from 937 miles away. Should look something like this. Who's laughing, who's hee-hawing, and who just realized that their model makes no sense. That would be you. But I mean, you can just look at the moon landing footage. Go look at Apollo 11 when they're getting close to the moon. The moon is identical in brightness as from the Earth. Well, why? Because surprise, they were on Earth.
Yeah,
it's things like that are solid, scientifically proven facts that people just short circuit on and just get that fluoridated stare. It's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. And that is what that's why we're trying, we certainly can't explain the mainstream model, because not even they can to any reasonable degree. Therefore, that's when we're trying to invoke the common sense part of it. This is where I come from when I talk about, being able to transmit certain distances and, how this applies. Now, the math can show one thing, and you can, manipulate the math to show anything that you want. And one thing that I will say about, like path loss calculations is I think that the path loss calculations are not necessarily accurate beyond anything that's earthbound. I think it's probably more of a general rule of thumb, for earthbound type calculations. But when you start getting into these stellar distances of thousands, millions, billions, trillions of miles, and then into light years, I think that it breaks down very much in the same way that we've got a general rule of thumb of 8 inches per mile squared for a curvature formula. But we know that after about 1,000 miles, compared to the Sagitta calculations, that it starts taking quite a divergence. And I believe that this is very much the same truth for the inverse square law as well. But in any event, there's still a whole lot of problems with it. And we simply cannot demonstrate these distances or anything like it in anything realistic here on Earth. And that is precisely why, we have to have radio stations which have the lowest amount of path loss, broadcasting at 50 kilowatts, 50,000 watts. And, during the day, it barely covers the state of Colorado. And we're talking about broadcasting from Squaw Mountain, which is 11,000 feet up in the air, a good 6,000 feet above the rest of the terrain that's all around Colorado. And at night, we do good to cover maybe a third of the country with 50 kilowatts. These are the type of practical examples I'm trying to put in people's mind so that they understand why it's not really plausible that we're able to broadcast these distance, and it sure as heck isn't plausible or probable in any way, shape, or form that we're going to see light propagate these distances either. Especially, go ahead.
I was going to say what happens is people get caught up by NASA in every different way possible. An example of that would be I just did a video this week on Jarrah White, who did pretty good work on the moon landings and has done videos exposing the hoax for years, but he's fallen victim to the blindness that a love of science can cause. And that's, I think I'm going to start calling it Cybrel syndrome, because that syndrome happens when somebody comes to the conclusion that the moon landings were faked, but orbits is taught and spacecrafts and their gravity kicks and atmospherical reentry and the ISS are all real. This happens because, well, in my opinion at least, that NASA purposely releases certain leaked info, like the video of the Apollo 11 team clearly faking the image of the Earth from orbit. So Bart Cybrel, who just happened to be conveniently doing a documentary about the moon landing hoax, very conveniently gets this leaked video sent to him on accident. And for that reason, if you're smart enough to be on your own and see the fraud of the moon landings, well, then you have certainly seen Cybrel's video. So a funny thing happened on the way to the moon. And if you've seen the film, then if you've chosen not to believe in the moon landings, then you believe that they were in orbit. And if you believe in orbits, then you still believe the foundational lie that NASA has sold you. And for me, I'm not in the business of trusting liars or killers. So once I see that I'm being misled, well, then I become extremely skeptical of anybody's claims or any of their claims. And so I scrutinize them down to the nitty gritty. And if you do get to that point, if you have the cojones to do so, then you can stand up and call bullshit. But Jarrah White, he feels, because that I think he based everything off that moon, Cybrel's moon movie, that they still do orbit. And when people questioned him on his pictures of Pluto, he goes crazy saying, how could you question these? These are real pictures of Pluto. How could they fake these? And same thing with SpaceX. Lately, he's been on a big trip about how great SpaceX is because they're reverse landing these rockets. And his proof of that is because here, this video doesn't show any cuts, as if you'd be able to see cuts in a video. I mean, you don't think that they can mask cuts that you wouldn't be able to notice it? You don't think they can record models, tiny models, and pass them off as real with the green screen technology and CGI the way it is? It's so easy to fake people. And why nobody can see that, I'll never know. And how they can show one landing and say there's no cuts here, and that means SpaceX is real. It baffles the imagination of how anybody can be so foolish as to, you got screwed once by them completely lying about the moon landings. And it's not like they lied and then said, you're right, we didn't go. They're lying to your face every day. And yet you'll still take other things they say and trust that? That's crazy.
Right. Yeah. And you're exactly right about that too, Jaron, because the Cybrel video, I mean, for those believers or those people that believe that we did not go to the moon, all of a sudden it comes out and he's saying, see, faked evidence, they're really in low Earth orbit, which may or may not even be possible. Of course, what is low Earth orbit, right? It could be up there in a balloon at 150,000 feet. It's hard to say because that certainly is what the ISS footage looks like. It looks like balloon footage from, somewhere between 100 and 200,000 feet up. But again, getting back to the Cybrel video, then because, people see that and they say, see, they were staging it. What this does is it lends credibility to the idea that they can even, get up there and be that high up. And so people will think, well, then, they were just faking the moon landings because of some Cold War stunt that Cold War thing we had going on with Russia, right? Which is nonsense. Again, that's a complete diversion of what's actually happening there. And that's exactly what it was designed to do.
They do it all over the place. I mean, it's just the same as them sending in Buzz Aldrin to talk to Alex Jones, because he went to Alex Jones and told him privately that there was a secret moon mission and that they couldn't take film of the moon, so that they faked the pictures or whatever. So now that's Alex Jones's thing. And the thing about that is, imagine you're a guy who's been talked to by Buzz Aldrin face to face, and Buzz Aldrin tells you these inside secrets. Well, you're not going to listen to anybody saying that the Earth is flat or anybody saying anything about space travel because you've been told by Buzz Aldrin privately about the secret space mission. So what that does is it's an excellent tool because they know that Alex Jones is one of the biggest voices in alternative media and in conspiracy talk. So once you've gotten that into his head, he cannot even think of the idea that Buzz Aldrin was lying to his face because Alex Jones is, not going to think that way. So what does he do? He just tells everybody every day that the moon landings, okay, well, there was some things that were faked, but they really did go. They really do have spacecraft out there because he's been told that by Buzz Aldrin. So they're always thinking so many steps ahead of all of us. You actually have to be able to step out of that box and think for yourself. And that's something that they didn't teach anybody in school on purpose. They sat you in a desk, put a teacher up there, and we all learned facts are handed to us. And that's why you've got people out there who say, oh yeah, the earth isn't round. Well, then what is it? Show me the picture of the edge, because people don't know how to do anything themselves. They want everything handed to them. They say, I've already been handed all the truth about the globe when I sat in a desk. I want all the truth about the flat earth, or I'm not listening to you.
Yeah. Well, and in terms of Sibrel syndrome, I know exactly what you mean. And to me, and you sort of touched on it too, Bob, is like fake space is more than just realizing that they faked the moon landings. That's one thing. To come to the conclusion that they totally faked the Apollo missions and tricked people into thinking we went to the moon, that's pretty bad. But to say that, for example, like you said, Bob, Russia's also in on this hoax, that takes someone to totally reconsider their entire worldview, because, Russia and the United States were supposedly sort of quasi, enemies during the Cold War period. And you've got this whole threat of nuclear annihilation and stuff. But I think Sibrel also very obviously loved NASA, sort of growing up, because there were portions of that when he was confronting the astronauts, trying to get him to swear on the Bible, where you could literally see he was about to tear up, because like he once admired these guys and thought that, he apparently Sibrel was in the news business for some time. And so he knew about, he covered astronaut stuff for a while. And so he was into it. But it's one thing to say that, they faked the moon landings. It's a whole nother thing to say that NASA, China, Russia, all the world space agencies are in on this same hoax. And, it really seems too grandiose for some people without totally re-examining everything that they, think to be true. So, I'm not giving them a free pass, but I guess I can kind of see where they're coming from.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Ian, and that's the thing, is I think that at some point, it's in the game plan to kind of release the idea that, oh, well, no, we didn't go to the moon because we had all these other issues going on, but we had to do it because of this Cold War with Russia. And in fact, I always forget the name of the movie, Jaren always remembers it, but there was the movie where they were describing, that they were actually from NASA, and they said, no, we had to do that because of the Cold War with Russia. And so it was a brilliant deception, to throw Russia off track, us telling, I'm sorry, which movie?
Interstellar, right?
Interstellar, that's it. Okay, thank you, because I always forget that. But the movie Interstellar, they come right out and say that straight up. In addition, you have Ron Howard, right, who supposedly made this video where he went in one of the space modules with his buddy, and he's telling him about how Apollo 11 was staged because we really weren't ready for it at the time, and just comes up with all these excuses. Well, and that's exactly what we're seeing, because we're seeing NASA today acknowledge that, there's still an obvious problem with the Van Allen radiation belt, right? So, if we can't get through it now, or we're still trying to figure out this way, then obviously we couldn't have done it back in 69, all those times that we supposedly did it. So they've got to kind of cover up, make a plausible story that they're covering up and say, oh yeah, we really didn't go, but, this is the reason why, whether it was a Cold War with Russia or because they were still working out the bugs in shielding for, the Van Allen radiation belts, whatever. The point is they're setting themselves up in a position to be able to, come off looking like heroes, that they did this for the good of the country because we didn't want the big bag Russians to come and get us, right? So, and that's the way I see it, and that's where they're going to try and take this. But the bottom line is that, they're one way or the other going to have to admit that it was faked, and they're going to have to do it in such a way where they will retain credibility, however they're going to do that, with the people of the world, right? Which ought to be quite a trick in my eyes.
Well, it won't ever happen until all of the astronauts are dead. I know that for sure, because there's no way you would put somebody under that. I mean, that was probably part of the deal, is that it will never come out, because it is their word against anybody else's. Nobody can prove. You'd have to go there and see that there's not the lander there and stuff. But since they know nobody can go to space, that they know that they're protected. And that's ultimately what this big space lie is, I'm under the belief now, based on my research, that space, the idea of space and where the planets are and the distances are all a computer simulation. They were entered into a computer long ago, so they know that nobody can go there. So by being the group that put in the numbers first, and you go out and teach this information that the only way to prove space is not what they say is to go to Mars and measure it. Well, since nobody can go there, that they're safe. And, they are going to have to release it eventually. But yeah, I do think it would have to be after the astronauts are gone, because they're not going to come out and say, oh yeah, they were faked, and then everybody attack Buzz Aldrin. They're going to have to wait until everybody's gone.
Yeah, and I mean, I see what you're saying, that we can't really prove that they didn't go to the moon, but I mean, we can certainly prove that they faked the footage, which ought to say something of the character of NASA. And being that it's a tax-funded, and even still to this day is a tax-funded organization, but really, if you find out that it's a tax-funded scientific body that's the only one supposedly exploring space, and you catch them lying, frankly, some heads should roll, if not do away with the thing altogether. But instead you see the people that are involved getting promoted. And so to me, the circumstantial evidence, it just mounds up and is sufficient enough for me to say, that they absolutely didn't go to the moon. And it's not just because of the fake footage, but it's because of just the sheer impossibility of the issue, and their entire model being wrong, of course. So,
well, if you look at it like, I think you said it perfectly there, that, yeah, we can't prove it. And what I mean by that is, if I allowed people from across the street to look in my window of my house and had the drapes pulled so they could see through. Now, if I had a mathematical equation for everything that was in that house, the size that it was and everything, but nobody was ever allowed to go in there, there's really no way that, as long as it's mathematically perfect, what I'm saying is in there, it could be completely made up. And as long as people can't go into the house and actually verify, they have no choice but to either call me a liar and just walk off, or to believe what I'm saying. And that's what space is they made a mathematical proof of everything. So it cannot be debunked. It is the self-correcting codes that Dr. James Gates found in the equations of the universe, because they're self-correcting codes, meaning you can't prove Saturn isn't the size that they say. You'd have to go to Saturn, because everything else works with Saturn the size that they say. That's why it's mathematically correct. And that's where they leave us, is we're all stuck here. And it would be, 100 years down the road until people started realizing, hey, these guys are lying, because nobody's going to space. They keep telling us we're going to have all these things happen that never happen. And that's what we're trying to do, is speed up that happening, so that it's not 100 years from now until people wake up and realize, hey, they've been feeding us this bullshit for 150 years. It should end now. And like you said, John, heads should roll.
Right. Well, and they sort of have been promising things for decades and decades. It hasn't been 100 years, of course, but I mean, really ever since the Apollo faked missions, and even before then, America had plans to colonize the moon and then colonize Mars. And we're still hearing this sort of rhetoric today, but they never deliver anything more than just really sort of poorly faked, footage and stories. And, they like to play their guitars and blow their trumpets and stuff on the ISS. But other than that, it really appears that any scientific achievements that are coming from NASA are coming from people on the ground in a lab, and obviously not astronauts faking space inside of a swimming pool.
Jaron, I've got a quick question for you. Bob and I were talking the other day, and I think we're pretty much in agreement that flat Earth, the secret, is the key to the control that the powers that be have over us, and the revealing of flat Earth to the masses would completely destroy the control system. Do you think if flat Earth is about to go mainstream, that they will do something to divert everyone's attention?
I do.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because that's why I know it's not a psyop, because you would not. And I was talking to a group yesterday about this on a hangout, and I was saying that what they cannot have happen is they can't have people wake up like I woke up. And that's why I have a big problem with people that have a problem with the circle map. And the reason for that is I'm not even saying that the circle map is anywhere near correct. What I'm saying is that it took that map for me to wake up and see the possibility that I've been lied to on a grand level. And then I was able to really push away the entire structure. I was push away NASA, push away the idea of space, and really discover things for myself. Now I'm open to the square map. I'm open to the Pac-Man map. I'm open to anything now, but it took that circle map. It took the azimuthal equidistant for me to get to that point. So when people say, oh, that map was put out on purpose, that, the New World Order or whatever, the United Nations has that as their map because, as their logo, because they wanted to kind of slowly release this, I say bullshit. There's no way that they want to slowly release this, because once you've released this, then then your entire power structure will crumble, because people, once they see you've been lied to on this level, then it allows you to see, or at least look into everything. And that's the last thing they want. They don't want John and I looking into atoms like we have. They don't want us looking into particle physics. They don't want us looking into these dinosaurs, all these things that they've set up, because they're all at some level a major deception. And so you have to be the little yes boy in order to be under their control. As soon as you step out of that, then all cards are off the table.
Well, and look at the growing popularity of flat Earth here, especially in the last few months. I really think it's sort of exploding. I wouldn't say that it's gone mainstream, but I really doubt that it ever will until 90% of the people know the truth. But yeah, what we're seeing now, of course, is just the war drums are beating harder than ever with all of these. North Korea is testing nuclear weapons, which is a big joke, of course. The attack on Syria, and so there's definitely they want us to perceive tension in the mainstream, and so that's sort of the opposite of what I do. And I really don't believe a word that I hear from the mainstream outlets or the CIA or the government at all. But I see them going to any lengths to keep this put this cat back in the bag. But frankly, I put it in the analogy of a virus before. The truth is sort of like a virus in a sense that once enough people understand it and are aware of it, then they sort of people feel a moral imperative to share it with their friends and family and loved ones, regardless of the consequences. And it doesn't always go well, but once you go flat, you never go back. And it really is true, because you don't have any sort of lukewarm flat earthers, really. You've either got somebody that's a globe head and has never heard of flat earth, or you have somebody that's looking at it for the first time skeptically, or you have someone that's 100% a passionate flat earther. And so it is sort of contagious, if you will. And so they're not going to be able to put this cat back in the bag, but I definitely think that they will try. And I think we already sort of see them trying with all of this World War III talk and nuclear annihilation talk, which is a big joke to me.
John, the comment is, once you go flat, you don't globe back. Somebody coined that. I like it. But the point I was going to make was, God, I completely spaced out on my point. It'll have to come back to me. I just got zapped.
I hate it when that happens. Okay, well, let me throw in one other thing. When we were talking about all these crazy orbits and the dynamics of orbital velocities and orbit dynamics in general, and when you're looking at the sun traveling through the solar system, and we've shown this many times before, because most people, when they look at the solar system, they think about it as just the sun sitting there static in the middle and everything going around it. But when you actually show the sun propelling forward at over 500,000 miles an hour, literally dragging all the planets with it, then you look at that and you're thinking, well, how does that work? How is it that these things are never interfering with each other's orbital patterns? And then beyond that, something that isn't being shown here is, what about all the moons on all these planets? And some of them have dozens and dozens of moons, and all of those have mass that are all playing into the same thing, and somehow it all just works like clockwork.
It's a simple answer, Bob. Simple answer. The each body only has to worry about one other body, because they can't resolve more than a two-body equation, right, Jaron?
Absolutely. And even more than that, I like to also point out that as much as we talk about the speeds, and even I do it, I think it's better to point out the fact that whether you're going 1 mile an hour, 10 mile an hour, or 10 trillion miles per hour in space, it doesn't make a difference, because there's no resistance. Space is space. So you've given them a platform with which they can do anything they want. And that's more of the basis of the lie. Because when you talk to me, we're spinning 1,000 miles, we're going, well, you wouldn't notice 66,000 miles per hour. Okay, well, in space, you're right. I wouldn't notice a zillion miles per hour. So what difference does it make? Then you're just giving them permission to make crazy claims about the size of the great attractor being some quadrillion miles wide, or nonsense that has never been proven, has never been shown scientifically, has never been shown in any kind of evidential test. And these are the things that people need to see. At this crazy speed, we've just allowed them to do that, because when you've given them the platform of, here's space, something that Einstein says is curved due to matter, but that doesn't make any sense. How can nothingness be curved? The fabric of space-time, well, you have a fabric of nothing. So what are you curving? It's just all nonsense. And you've given them permission to send things at any speed, and it doesn't matter. I mean, really, the ISS is either it's not moving or it's going 17,500 miles per hour. Either one doesn't matter. In space, it's the same. Whether it was a bazillion miles per hour, it would make no difference.
Right. Well, and beyond that, the one other thing that always struck me as odd as well is, they talk about the ISS occasionally has to, fire some rockets so it can reorient its orbital position as well, supposedly as other satellites. But here's the thing, they say that there's no friction in space, and so there's nothing ever to slow anything down. So theoretically, things can move on forever. And yet, you have things that are supposedly, the ISS supposedly is being acted upon to drag its velocity down by the atmosphere of the Earth, right? Because even though they're not in the atmosphere per se, there is still enough air particulates, if you will, up there that it's causing, a slowdown in the orbital velocity, which has to be corrected occasionally, as it does for many other things. But so that begs the question then, if that's affecting on other things, then why is the Earth's atmosphere itself not, slowing the Earth down? Again, this is one of those disconnects that doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. You're right. It's spinning into its own atmosphere, which should slow it down.
Right. And at what altitude does the atmosphere no longer spin commensurate with the spin of the Earth, right? There's got to be an answer to that somewhere. And also, in addition to that, no matter what latitude you are, there's going to be different variances of velocity of the atmosphere, spinning around the Earth. Again, that's another big problem. And these are just things that people just blindly accept. It's like, when do you finally get out of the atmosphere where we are no longer affected by the Earth spinning around at 1,000 miles an hour, and you're caught in that atmospheric drift? Where is the boundary? See, that's the thing that they try and convince us of, and that's the whole thing. They say, well, they talk about, go ahead, John.
I'll just say Coriolis force is exactly what you just described, that you can't have both. You can't have an atmosphere that moves commensurate with the Earth and then also have Coriolis force.
Exactly. Yep, exactly. And you can find time lapse after time lapse where you've got in the same frame 2 layers of clouds where one's going west and one's going east, at significant velocities, which totally debunks the notion that the atmosphere is somehow tattooed to the Earth, which it absolutely isn't. I mean, you also have winds aloft, which are taken advantage of by jet airliners. And so this whole premise that the atmosphere magically adheres to the rotational velocity of the Earth, not only is it a physical impossibility, a logical fallacy, but it also is demonstrably not what's going on. And in terms of the Kármán line or the edge of space, and where does that end, and where does the atmosphere end, and where does space begin? Frankly, it's quite irrelevant, because assuming a heliocentric model, I don't care how massive and dense the Earth is, the gravity, in quotes, generated by a planetary body couldn't possibly keep disparate diffuse gases like helium and hydrogen essentially adjacent to a near perfect vacuum. It makes absolutely no sense. And then furthermore, you've got, like, for example, going back to the Apollo astronauts, when they were returning from their lunar voyage, allegedly, they would have been totally out of frame of reference with the Earth itself. And so it seems like they would have been, at least from a logical standpoint, humoring their journey, of course, they would have just been torn to shreds upon reentry because of that super high velocity, relatively dense atmosphere. It'd be like hitting a brick wall at, however, 20,000 miles per hour or whatever, through space. It'd be like hitting a brick wall that's traveling at high velocities upon return. So yeah, the whole thing is just ridiculous. It really is.
So the Glover argument to, gravity holds the atmosphere on, and it gets thinner and thinner as you go up, and, until it's nothing, and then there's space. That's the best argument they can come up with. But the easy proof of that gravity is not holding the atmosphere down is to just tell them to get an empty bottle, suck out just a little bit of the air, put the top on. Now you have what we will call a lesser vacuum, not a very strong vacuum at all. And then poke a hole in the bottom of it. And if it is able to suck air up and away from Earth, that proves that gravity cannot hold the air down to a vacuum. And to make it even more obvious, you can stick the bottom of that bottle in a tub of water, poke a hole in it, and that little lesser vacuum, way less powerful vacuum, will suck water up and away from the magic of gravity. That is a scientific, testable, repeatable way to prove that gravity gravity is not holding the atmosphere to the Earth.
Yeah, exactly. The whole thing doesn't work. I mean, just do an experiment where you've got a large vacuum chamber and stick some sort of, I don't know, a fish tank in the center where it's got water and different types of gases coming up from it, whatever the case is. Stick a cube of dry ice in there. I don't know if that's a good example, but if you expect that gas to form a cloud within a vacuum chamber, no, it's going to expand to fill the vacuum. That's how that should work. And gravity just frankly isn't strong enough to keep the atmosphere in such a way. It's one of those things where people see it as, if they assume a globe, it proves a globe. But if you think about this logically and assume nothing, you just simply can't have even a gradient pressurized system next to or within the vicinity of or within the belly of a vacuum.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. And another thing that's really way off about this too is, we've all heard the argument of, well, what if you're in a train and you're throwing a ball back and forth, and that supposedly is the explanation for why airplanes don't have any problem going east versus west, because they're saying that the atmosphere is moving along commensurate with the speed of the Earth. But if that was true, it seems to me that there would be a bias of the atmosphere spinning in the same direction as the Earth, and whenever you tried to counteract that, you would encounter these large headwinds. But they say no, it isn't that way, because they use the example of if you're in a train, right, you could fly around a little model helicopter while you're going in the train and all that stuff, and that's great. But the problem is the train represents a closed system. The Earth and the space above it and the vacuum is not a closed system. Absolutely is not a closed system, and that's where people really get caught up into this lie, because it doesn't work that way.
Even assuming a closed system, just for argument's sake, throwing a ball across a few feet is different than something that's under constant high propulsion. And so I would submit, and I know this for a fact, doing it experimentally just for fun, riding trains throughout the years, not necessarily with some sort of a drone or something, but with my own legs. But if you were to race on a moving train that's going straight down the track 50 miles an hour, closed system, if you were to take an airplane from the back of the train towards the front of it, relative to the stationary objects, the seats, and the passengers on the train, that journey going towards the front of it is going to be a more difficult journey than a similar small plane going from the front towards the back, again, relative to the stationary objects on the train, again, because at some point that object is accelerating in the opposite direction as all of the stationary objects, and so the relative speed between the two would begin to grow, whereas the train traveling with the flow of the train going from the back towards the front would have to race against those stationary objects. So, I mean, it really is quite a simple thing, but globe heads try to complicate it with this whole argument of the atmosphere. But, frankly, airplanes are designed to be aerodynamic and, reduce drag, increase thrust, and they're designed to cut through the air. And the flight times would be wildly different in terms of eastbound compared to westbound. And quite frankly, most of the time they're identical. Sometimes the eastbound flights are shorter, which is the opposite of what you'd expect if everything was racing east, regardless of what the atmosphere is doing. And it's not doing what they say, because just like you said, all westbound planes would instantly begin to experience, as a rule, major headwind. And they just don't. You can have headwinds or tailwinds regardless of which way you're traveling. It just depends on the weather.
Right. And yet we look at the flat earth model, and you look at the nullschool.net model, and you switch it to AE mode, and you look at the winds aloft or the ocean's currents. And when you're in AE mode, all of a sudden it makes sense, because everything's going around in a circle. And that to me makes a whole lot more sense, when you're looking at it that way, with the idea that there may or may not be a dome there, which again, that's a subject that's up for debate. But in any event, it tends to make a lot more sense, because once again, this is not a closed system. You cannot claim that gravity is capping these different layers of atmosphere and creating a closed system, because that simply is not the way it works. It's just like David said, if you could evacuate a container to a certain degree, take it up to a certain altitude, and it still will draw off atmosphere, then obviously that kind of debunks the idea of gravity being strong enough to hold the atmosphere on top of the spinning ball. It just doesn't make any sense. So, and again, we say that it doesn't make any sense because it is completely non sequitur in logic. There's no logical explanation as to why or how that works. and any of those idiots that are out there in other hangouts trying to debunk us, I challenge you to come up with an explanation that explains that. You won't be able to. So anyway,
hey, I remember the quick point I was going to make when we're talking about maps. I'm a believer that the AE map is probably maybe the closest thing we have, but there could be lots of things wrong with it. But it's closer than any of the globe maps. All of the globe maps are completely wrong. If you look at plane flights and all sorts of information, they're farther or way worse than what we have. Would you agree with that? I mean, of course.
Right.
So when a glober says, your map, you don't have a map. Well, you don't have a globe.
That's right. They don't, and they all continue to take on the Mercator projection instead of actually showing the true relative size of the continents. And here's look at this phony Earthrise we got here. Here we go. So once again, the Earth, nothing but clouds and ocean. All landmass is covered by clouds. This is such nonsense. But whenever we get these composite pictures of the Earth, they all seem to reflect the Mercator map in continent sizes.
Bob,
and that should tell you. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Is that literally something that came from a space agency as real, or is this?
We are looking at the Japanese Selene orbiter and Earthrise is what we just saw. Let me back it up just a little bit. We can watch it again.
So the Earth rising means that spaceship has to be orbiting around that body, around the moon, super fast, because the moon doesn't rise. I mean, the Earth doesn't rise on a non-spinning moon. So as fast as that is going up is as fast as that spaceship would have to be going around the curve. I don't know if anybody can figure out what that speed must be, but it makes no sense.
Somebody can define it mathematically, no doubt.
Yeah, maybe Flat Earth Math can do that one for us.
Yeah, but once again, they changed the entire. You notice that just before the Earthrise comes up here, they changed to a completely different foreground, right? All of a sudden, everything went white, and now it's kind of shifting back to gray, and we have the Earth coming up perfectly. No rotation, no cloud change, no nothing. Just this ball kind of popping up in the air. Absolutely.
That is funny.
Absurd.
It's like somebody's playing volleyball on the other side of the moon.
And wouldn't there be huge long shadows from moving away because the sun is behind the camera? I mean, they're showing little shadows on the far side of the craters, but you would think that it would be just before sunset. There would be very long shadows moving away.
Well, the sun has to be directly behind the camera because the Earth is fully lit.
Correct.
But it looks like, and I can't tell from here, but it looked like the shadows. I don't know. That looked like CG to me, man. Honestly, like the moon bit of it. I'm not sure what to say.
Of course, it's CG. We know there's no craft up there.
It looks like South Park, for Christ's sake. Oops, sorry, Easter.
What I'm saying is it looks like they got the shadows right in terms of if the sun was directly behind us, but it still seems like we're getting a bit of a hot spot off towards the right hand side of the screen, like a bit. Now it's blurred out again, but yeah, it's good CGI for sure.
Well,
I don't think it's good.
I don't think it's good CGI at all, John.
I'm talking about the texture on the moon, not necessarily the whole Earthrise thing, but yeah, the texture on the moon looks good.
Does it? I think Cartman might disagree with that.
Yeah, it's pretty pathetic, but yeah, I mean, you look at this, and I watched this for quite a while yesterday. They've been broadcasting it over and over and over again, and all these clowns in the comment section are completely buying into it, and it is such a joke that anybody can buy into this. And you see these, look at this, now we got it coming back here. Let's see what this looks like. I don't think I've seen this part, so this must be Earth setting. And
what explains the change in size with the same horizon on the moon?
Is that two different videos, or is that supposed to be
same one?
Oh wow,
same one.
Wait a minute, that doesn't even make any sense. How could they see it? It was supposed to happen right after they saw it rise.
Orbital mechanics.
No, that's not right. That's not right at all. The Earth should have been in front of them the whole time. It shouldn't be behind them. That's ridiculous.
I love the fact that they can only film the moon for the one moment that the Earth for the one moment that it would be full. There would be the chance of catching it perfectly full like that are slim.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and it's anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
It's totally changed size as well. How is that possible? No matter where it is over the face of the moon, why all of a sudden do we have a completely different sized Earth, right?
If anybody believes that ground is real, I mean, you can't. That's not even worth talking. I mean, it's just not worth. Those people.
There is totally a look. There's a building there, and a whole pause it. There's like a temple and a bunch of buildings there. I swear, I'm not joking. They're putting that. I'm telling you, they're putting that stuff in there for what's that guy's name? The Q-tip looking guy, the nasshole guy.
Q-tip looking guy?
Yeah, he's like totally white-headed, white beard, white guy.
I have no idea who you're talking about.
He's got like 3 names.
All right, so here we're coming now. Tell me where to pause it, Johnny, because I didn't see what you were talking about. So here's the Earth dropping down.
Okay, and I'll try to think of that guy's name. We've talked. Oh, pause it right there.
Oh, are you talking about Tom Campbell?
No, not him. Let me look in the chat. Maybe somebody in the chat knows who. Anyway, if you look towards the left, right where you've got the arrow, do you see it looks almost like a Greek temple with little columns, and then behind it, like a few frames earlier, it looked like there was a bunch of little, I don't know, like the remnants of an old civilization. And
I think Morgul's been hanging out with what's his name from NASA a little bit.
Well, no, what I'm
Richard Hoagland. You've been hanging out with Hoagland lately.
There you go, Richard C. Hoagland. That's exactly who I was thinking of. But yeah, no, I think they put stuff in there like Easter eggs for people to find, to be like, oh, look, there may have been alien civilizations on the moon.
Yeah, do you see this giant moon trout right here, John?
It's a moon sausage.
No, it's a fish, man. It's a moon trout. It is.
That's wild.
Yep. So anyway,
look at all the straight lines. I mean, seriously, because the old saying, nature doesn't make straight lines and squares.
Look at that perfectly circular crater right in the middle of the screen there. I mean, it's a perfect circle.
Oh,
How would you know?
Yeah, they all are. What, Darren?
So why wouldn't you be able to see stars? They talk about it being overexposed or this or that, but you would be able to see them. There's just
you would, and they're trying to tell us because the aperture setting on the camera is set too far down so that the Earth itself doesn't turn into a white blob of light. But the point is we're looking at the moon or the Earth from obviously 240,000 miles away, and even when we looked at the backside of it over here, the moon was very dark, and we're looking back away from the sun, right? So the aperture should then be capable of seeing stars at this point because it sees the Earth, at least faintly, if nothing else, because I can go outside with my camera and see the stars even when all the lights in the neighborhood are on. So for them to even insinuate that their cameras suck that bad is simply not believable at all. That the aperture cannot automatically adjust, or they couldn't manually do it.
No, they couldn't afford to put one on top.
Yeah.
I can take this video and put it into my editor because you can change the colors, and usually doing that I can get like starlight to come out and see. I bet you there'll be none. It'll be pitch black.
Oh yeah, by changing the exposure, absolutely you should be able to do that. Well, this has been running for quite some time. It's been running for the past couple of days, so I'm sure you can do some captures of it without any problem, or just go to the original source footage. But yeah, you're right. Look at the perfect craters, that all of them would have required absolutely a perfect 90-degree angle hit. And, a lot of them we see from the Earth. So how did these asteroids or comets or whatever struck it, how did they hit it at such perfect 90-degree angles when we've got, the Earth just a mere 240,000 miles away? Again, another anomaly that we're just asked to accept. It's horse hockey.
And the biggest part of that, though, is that the side of the moon that faces us always faces us. And so in order to get a 90-degree meteoroid hit or whatever the heck it is, like you're seeing here with these perfect circles, then somehow the asteroid would have had to come from the direction of the Earth, but totally miss the Earth. And that makes absolutely no sense because the Earth's gravity should have pulled it into itself, or at least into an orbit around Earth for some time. And it really absolutely should not have hit the moon. I mean, it really doesn't make sense when you're talking about those perfectly circular craters on the front side of the moon.
I bet somebody can do some captures and show some Photoshop stepped and repeated craters or crater formations that repeat before it goes all the way around.
Right. And let's not dismiss the most obvious glaring problem with this footage, and that is
brightness.
Where's the parallax? Where's the parallax? Look at it. It's just coming by like it's on a player piano.
What about the brightness? Why isn't it 80,000 lumens?
Yeah,
they've got the aperture cranked way down.
Oh, that's why we can't see the stars. Makes perfect sense.
Right. Yeah. Why can we see the Earth? Go ahead, Jaron.
On that same guy's channel, I saw yesterday yesterday. He has a video out that I don't know if it's still up. It's one of his live feeds that he's got the star trails that the ISS made, or the star trails that they filmed. And when I started watching it, the star trails go straight up and straight behind you, which means that the ISS must be traveling exclusively on the equator, which it does not. So I mean, that's another one that I don't know where he got those. I think he put it's from 5,000 images taken aboard the ISS or something, but it's completely garbage.
Yeah. Where is Charles Flat Earth Math when you need him for all these, ball Earth answers?
I'm supposed to be talking to him tomorrow because he seems to think that I've gotten something wrong with my SpaceX landing video, which I've looked at that so many times, and the different views are impossible to be reconciled.
Just landing on a pitching and rolling raft in 20 to 30 knots of wind, it would be impossible. You'd have a hard time standing on that thing.
On a spinning sphere, no less.
Because I think people are missing the point of what I'm showing. What I'm showing is actual proof that it was fake. That if you look at the footage from the rocket coming down, it lands to the side closest to it. But when you look at the other view, it flies across the platform and lands at the edge furthest from it. Well, those two things are impossible. You can't do both. And yeah, I don't think I said it well enough, because nobody seems to get the fact that if I'm right and I still am waiting for somebody to show me where I'm wrong, then that is the proof that the videos are fake. So Flat Earth Math says the same thing, but I'm trying to maybe I didn't explain it well enough.
No, I saw what you did and I got it. But even still, for somebody like Flat Earth Math, the lack of curvature and axial rotation should be the number one indicators of a flat, stationary Earth or a spinning sphere Earth. But it's just, to me, it's just so absurd that you have to take it to such lengths as to prove that NASA or SpaceX are fake and stuff like that in order to get someone to even consider the obvious. Sorry, Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, there's just so many things that are wrong with this. And like I said, where's the parallax? Anybody that knows, if people don't understand what I'm talking about when I say where's the parallax, I'm simply saying, think about yourself driving down the highway, okay? And you see a car in front of you and you're coming up very slowly on that car, right? Or even an object just to the right side of the road, and you're kind of coming up very slowly to that. But then look a little bit to the left or to the right of your road, and you will see that things are exponentially increasing in speed to your left and to your right. This is exactly what parallax is. This is exactly what we should be seeing from this. We should be seeing a parallax difference between the center of the screen, the center focal point of this screen, and the extreme left and right. And we don't. What we see is a perfect linear progression, motion of all features of the moon, this fake moon, going at the same speed all the way across the frame. That is impossible.
Right. Yeah. So like these two craters right here, they should be going by more swiftly than the one way off to the left, and yet they're going by at the same speed. I mean, anybody can demonstrate this, like you said, if you're driving down the highway and if you're looking at a row of fences right off the side of the road, that's going to appear to go by very, very quickly. But the mountain range 50 miles away past the fence is going to appear to basically be stationary, right? And you don't see anything like that in this alleged footage. So yeah, it appears to be either a CGI thing or a model. You'd think with CGI they'd at least have added the parallax effect. So maybe it's just a model.
It likely is very much just like the Earth is from the ISS. They're showing a model. Well, remember when that infamous footage of the news station that was switching to a live feed to the ISS. Well, what they actually got was the two guys in the shed, and you could see the ISS model there and the big old lit up sphere, right? That was supposed to emulate the Earth, but they weren't quite ready yet. That's exactly what they're doing, is they're just taking that model and they're rotating it in front of a camera. And when you do that, you simply get no parallax whatsoever, when in fact you should be getting a dramatic amount of parallax. So again, pretty elementary stuff, I think. So all right, so I want to move on because we're getting up towards 3 hours here, but I wanted to kind of cover where we were going with the title of this, and that is The Sky and Its Limits. And of course, we've talked about many of those proofs already. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up was the idea of rocket propulsion in space. Okay. Now, we've talked about this before. And, I have to tell you, first of all, we are not the first to object to this whole idea of it being possible to have rocket propulsion in space. There are a whole lot of problems with the idea of of rocket propulsion in space. The most notable would be is that it seems to violate Newton's third law of motion, right? In other words, every action has an equal but opposite reaction. But when you are looking at that, okay, it's pretty easy to see how a rocket works in the atmosphere. Okay, pretty simple. Because when a rocket takes off from the ground, and most normal rockets, by the way, not NASA rockets, no, but normal rockets, when they take off from the ground, they have the greatest amount of acceleration when they first leave the ground. Why is that? Well, two reasons. One, because the rocket propulsion is working against the Earth itself. And secondly, once it gets away from the Earth itself, it is working against the highest amount of atmospheric pressure that is low to the ground, right? And as you go up away from the Earth, atmospheric pressure and density gets lower and lower and lower and lower. Therefore, it has less and less and less to work against. Now, what is NASA's explanation for this? Well, let's find out what their explanation for this is. I'm into the gyroscope stuff. Let me find my right page here. Here we go. Okay, so let's look at life science. And what does life science tell us? They say, well, first of all, they're trying to say that they're not in violation of Newton's third law of motion, but they're saying that the principle that they're going to use as an illustration to prove that the rockets are not using the atmosphere is this. Let's just read it. NASA says this principle is easy to observe on Earth. If you stand on a skateboard and throw a bowling ball forward, that force will push you and the skateboard back. However, because your weight on the skateboard is heavier than that of the bowling ball, you won't move as far. Okay, that's the challenge engineers face when they're designing space engines. Okay, great. So what they're describing here, first of all, and like I said, we've covered this many times before, is they're not really telling you how the rocket works so much as they are describing an effect called recoil. Okay, and this recoil is essentially what happens when you shoot a gun. Okay, when you shoot a gun, you are basically igniting the bullet, the gunpowder in the bullet, which is causing a chemical reaction, which is causing gases to expand inside the shell of the bullet, pressing on one side against the backside of the shell, well, against the shell of the bullet, pressing on the other side against the bullet itself, right? Until it gets to the point where the gas pressure becomes so great that it separates the bullet from the shell and the bullet takes off, just screaming like a bat out of hell going down the barrel, and you've got your shot there, right? Okay, so what NASA is trying to have us believe, all right, is that it is the rocket engine itself, the chemical reaction in the rocket engine itself, that is emulating this mass, right? That is necessary, like you're pushing the ball away from you. They're saying that it's the rocket fuel that is the mass itself, and when it becomes ignited, that this is essentially emulating or creating a mass sufficient to push away the rocket itself, right? Well, first of all, just like the gunpowder, the rocket fuel is nothing more than the chemical agent, right? It is not producing any mass. The mass that bullet is pushing against is the back of the gun, or the gun itself, which of course then is attached to you because it's in your hand and you're either propped up against something, or you have enough weight obviously to offset the small mass of the bullet, and it takes off. So like I said, ballers will say that it's the chemical reaction that produces the mass necessary to offset the rocket. Now, this is false because rocket fuel is acting only in the same capacity as the gunpowder in the bullet. The gas produced by the rocket fuel still has to push against something with mass. The chemical explosion only creates the force and not the mass, okay? Furthermore, if the atmosphere was not a requirement, right, then why does the rocket fuel nozzle need to be adjusted for optimum performance at specific altitudes? In other words, they're flat out admitting right there that, you've got to fine tune, you've got to get the correct venturi or the correct rocket nozzle to be able to provide optimum propulsion in the atmosphere at some point, right? So you think about that, and the whole explanation that it is indeed the chemical rocket fuel or the solid rocket fuel that is creating the mass is nonsense. It is acting exactly in the same way as the gunpowder occur. And the problem is that unlike the gun, which has the backside of the gun to pressurize against and to work against, thus validating Newton's third law, when you get up into space, you have nothing to work against. In fact, you have something that will instantaneously drain off that energy immediately. Therefore, if you have nothing to propel against, you have nothing, you're not going to go anywhere. It's as simple as that. And the whole idea of NASA saying, well, yeah, it's just like pushing the ball away from you when you're on a skateboard and you're going to go one direction is absolutely nonsense, because again, it requires at least a minimum of an equal amount of mass to be able to do this. And they don't carry this mass up with them. All they do is carry the chemical agent to be able to do this on the Earth and not in space.
Bob, let me just throw something else in there. It's even if you could push, get thrust in space magically, you would need something to resist for stability. Like when I used to launch model rockets, it had a guard wire until it was up to speed, where the fins would actually keep it going straight. If an airplane, was in the air and it wasn't moving at, it wouldn't be able to stabilize itself or turn or anything without something to resist against, like air. So you would need 500 different nozzles, computer corrected to align where it's going. Otherwise, if there was thrust, it would just spin out of control.
Well, and the other thing too, sorry to interrupt, but the other thing too is if you're sitting in a chair with wheels and you're going to throw a bowling ball away from you, there's mechanical action going on there in terms of your arms pushing away from the ball. So you have an action and a reaction there between the mechanical motion of your arms and the weight of the ball. But in terms of a rocket, and say it's in a vacuum, there is no sort of mechanical motion. It's supposedly an explosion, right? It's a combustion.
Well, that is the mechanical motion, supposedly.
Right, but so I could see that pushing off of the fuselage or off of the nozzle or whatever. But you're right. There's still nothing ambient for it to push off against. It's not like it has a mass like a dense bowling ball does. And I understand that
exactly
it's being, they allege that it's being ejected from the nozzle at supersonic speeds, but it's there is no reaction. There's no reaction there to be had, as far as I can tell.
Right, exactly. And the solid booster rocket fuel or the solid rocket fuel or whatever, even if it's chemical liquid form, it in and of itself has mass. However, they're trying to befoozle us by saying that by causing this chemical reaction that we are somehow creating mass to work against, and that is absolutely fallacy. That's like saying that the gunpowder, when it is being ignited, is creating mass to propel the bullet forward. That's not true at all. What is the mass that is providing Newton's third law, the opposite reaction, is the gun frame itself attached to your hand, attached to the Earth, just like a rocket. And again, that's why rockets, real rockets, not NASA jet engine rockets or whatever the hell they are, have the greatest amount of acceleration when they are closest to the ground, right? That's just the way they work. And furthermore, if any astronauts were actually in a real rocket and it took off at that speed, it would crush them instantly. They just simply couldn't survive that. It would be a G-force that would be completely off the scale. But so that's the whole point. Many people have come up with this. We're certainly not the only crazy people thinking this. In fact, this is great. This particular letter comes from the Straight Dope, and you got to love this. So here you have a guy from UCLA. This is my understanding of space is that it is a vacuum, i.e. devoid of pretty much all matter, just empty space. Also, from my amazingly limited knowledge of physics, I understand that in order for a force to create a movement, it must act upon something. So if a spacecraft fires its rocket into space, a vacuum, what is the force acting? What is this force is acting upon? If there is nothing there, what are the rockets pushing against to cause the ship to move? Just something I was thinking about because I have way too much free time, blah, 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 right? So here we have the Straight Dope staff that says, don't take this personally, Coulter, but you're no rocket scientist. Hardy har har. You're also not the first person who has failed to achieve Zen with Newton's third law, right? Yeah, I would say so, that he's definitely not achieved Zen with Newton's third law. In fact, he simply doesn't understand something, that Newton's third law is requiring something there to produce the equal but opposite reaction in force, and there is nothing there. So he hasn't misunderstood anything. And you would think that of all the scientists and engineers out there in the world that have really tried to break this down, that it would be pretty obvious and they'd be able to achieve Zen with this. But the fact is it fails on every comparison. You cannot have a chemical reaction that creates mass that is worked against instantaneously, because that force is instantly bled off into the vacuum of space. And again, this is not something that Globebusters came up with. This is something that I think we agree with, but it certainly isn't what we came up with. And I agree with it 100% because it defies all common sense. It defies the logic of Newton's third law, and it's utter horse hockey once again.
It's so funny though, because it really is a microcosm of what we get as flat earthers, where the original poster obviously knows what he's talking about and certainly understands, the laws of motion and Newton's laws of physics or whatever. But you've got this person who's trying to regurgitate the narrative. Well, let me sit down and explain you some Newton's laws, right? As if they're going to tell them something new. But in fact, I think it was Karen was her name. In fact, she goes ahead to totally not get the fundamental point of that law. So it's funny and sort of comical, ironic, and frustrating. So
right,
yeah.
And then they go on to try and explain it here, which is, this is just laughable. Of course, rockets work on a more sophisticated principles than just tossing fuel out the back. First, the fuel is burned and its hot exhaust gases are expelled at a very high velocity. That's all fine and dandy, but okay, so let me just continue on. If you toss the medicine ball faster, your body experiences a greater backward force. That's absolutely true. But again, you're tossing it against a mass that is there and measurable, versus you're trying to toss your rocket fuel against no mass and something that is indeed absorbing energy instantaneously, right? So they go into this long convoluted diagram or explanation, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And I will put this in the show notes so you can examine it yourself. But basically all they did was come back with a bunch of gobbledygook, and they never explained the fact that, hey, we're missing part of the equation for Newton's third law here. All right. That's the problem. That's the problem we see with it. That's the problem that a lot of physicists see with it. And, it's just another one of those magical things that we are expected, to believe. And again, like I said, if this is working solely on the idea of a recoil effect, right, then why do they have to have the rocket nozzles tuned, for optimum performance in the atmosphere? Doesn't make any sense. So again, you wouldn't even need that. So that's kind of, what I wanted to say about that. Any comments? Ooh, crickets. I'll take that as a no. All right. All right. Are you guys still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
I was muted. No, I pretty much said, and you've covered it really well, and I sort of had my 2 cents in there as well. But rocket propulsion in a vacuum, it really doesn't appear that it's a viable thing. And another thing that I learned pretty recently is that combustion of typically very flammable and combustible substances is not possible in a vacuum either. And so I'd really love to hear how they're actually, combusting their rocket fuel in a vacuum.
Right. Well, they're doing that, they would say, because of the fact they've got oxygen, liquid oxygen or some agent that would be assisting that chemical reaction. That would be, and that's all fine and dandy. But again, it still does not produce the mass needed for a recoil effect. Period. It just doesn't happen. You can't get more mass out of a chemical explosion. You can't create more mass by destroying it. It just doesn't happen, guys. That's not the way that physics works. And you cannot show me an example of anything else in physics that operates that way, because there isn't anything else in physics that operates that way, theoretically or otherwise. A good video to check out on this is Brian Mullins' Balls Out Physics, Episode 5, Propulsion in Space, where he highly questions it. Again, Clues Forum has done some fantastic work. And honestly, it's all over the web. Just search the question and look at both sides of the equation. Don't look at the mainstream example right away and believe that their rhetoric and their non-explanation is going to be an explanation, because it's not. Look at some of the more skeptical arguments of people saying that are engineers in physics, that are physicists that are qualified to answer these questions. These people, there are even rocket scientists that are out there telling you that, well, this still doesn't work because there's nothing to provide the condition of Newton's third law. So that's just another good thing to look at. So we've looked at that. I wanted to throw a shout out to DJ Sadhu for this graphic, as well as Space Videos for this, even though they're a bunch of frauds. And let's see, I had a whole bunch of other things I kind of want to touch on, I guess. And that is, I guess, one thing that I will go into right now is I've talked many times about the ring laser gyros, okay? And we have now gotten, funding where we can easily afford one of these, and it's great. So my task is to go out and find one, and I've actually found a couple, and I've actually got calls in to the sales centers to actually be able to get pricing on these, even though I have to say that Honeywell is a difficult one to track down. But there are basically two types of gyros that both are fully qualified and fully spec'd to be able to handle this job. One is of course, the Honeywell ring laser gyro, and then there's another type of gyroscope called the fiber optic gyro, which also easily has the sensitivity to be able to measure and detect the rotation of the Earth. This one specific company called KVH has a fiber optic gyro, and you can look at the specifications here. It easily is able to measure the rotation of the Earth. And basically, the way these things come is they come with a serial output that you can then interface to any type of computer interface to be able to see the output of the ring laser gyros. Okay, now, like I said, I've been on this kick for quite some time, and I am quite ready to bet the farm on this. That once we get one of these fiber optic gyros or ring laser gyros, I have the complete technical documentation of Honeywell's ring laser gyro here, the GG1320 ring laser gyro. Anyway, I've got all the technical information. I know that they can do it. We're going to buy one. They all have this serial output, essentially, that we can interface to a computer. We can then read the phase differential that goes on inside of the ring laser gyro. And for those that don't understand how the ring laser gyro works, I will be posting a link in the description of this show that explains it in detail, as well as we've covered it several times before here on Globebusters. But it is acknowledged by the mainstream that the ring laser gyro and also the fiber optic gyro absolutely has the ability to measure rotation of the Earth. We are finally going to be able to buy one of these, and we are going to put it to test ourselves. And I don't say if, I say when it comes back and shows that there is no motion to the Earth, then we are going to take that very same gyro and up in an airplane, and it doesn't matter what airplane. It can be a small aircraft, like the ones I fly, or it can be up in an airliner. It doesn't matter. The bottom line is that what we're going to be demonstrating there by the fiber optic gyro or ring laser gyro is that there is no compensation for the curvature of the Earth going on. In other words, the nose of the plane is not dropping down. There is no gravity that's affecting this, because gravity is no longer even an issue in this. This is simply determined by angular momentum. That is what the ring laser gyros depict, because like any gyro, their claim to fame is stability in space. And so I have two good candidates here for what we want to buy. I'll also post the information as to what the differences are between a ring laser gyro and a fiber optic gyro. But suffice it to say that they are being used for missile guidance and all kinds of stuff like that. They're incredibly precise. And we're going to bet the farm on this one. I'll tell you what, when it comes back, then now we're going to have our tool that other scientists and engineers are going to go, whoa, wait a minute. This is something that we acknowledge can detect the rotation of the Earth. And when it is showing absolutely zero motion, then a lot of other people are going to be jumping onto this gravy train. And that is exactly what we're trying to invoke. So I've been doing my homework. I've got some appointments with some sales reps this week. I will then forward that information to Victor, who has all the money and the purse strings. And if we get this, I will make it a point to fly to Ohio, to help him carry these out. Along with, we have a precision testing engineer that is on the team that is going to be overseeing and supervising this so that it is done absolutely correctly. We are also going to bring in some A&P certified mechanics, airframe and power plant, with aviation's endorsements for this type of calibration for this type of equipment. And in other words, we're not going to mess around. We're not going to leave it to the amateurs. We're going to invest some cash into this, and we're going to do it right. And when we do this right, say goodnight, Globers. It's over. And then it ought to be interesting to see where it goes from there. So I just wanted to give a little bit of a report on that. I will post all of this information in there. In the show notes that shows the specification of everything that we're going to be using. Well, we haven't made the final decision yet, but I've got a really good start on it so far. This is great, as well as all the technical documentation to it. So wanted to bring that up. And also, I wanted to give a shout out, honorable mention, to a new channel that's only, gosh, a couple weeks old, maybe something like that, by the name of Archer Sage. I actually just saw him comment last night about saying something that he'd like to join the Globebusters at some point. So I went and I looked at his videos. And one thing that I thought was great that he caught, and I'm going to play this video, it's only a minute 53, but what he's going to show in this video is when they're looking out the cupola of the ISS, what happens is every time they go to a new view, the curvature of the Earth resets and goes back to normal. So you guys got to see this. This is great. Shout out to you, Archer Sage, and thank you so much for this. And perhaps we will have you on one of these days. So let's give this a really quick play.
Hey guys, Archer Sage here. I just wanted to point out something interesting I found from the NASA Johnson YouTube channel, which shows astronaut Scott Kelly showing us the curvature of the Earth. Now watch, if you continue the curve here, if you follow this angle, it should continue to curve upwards. Now watch, it's going to reset again. And now the curvature resets again. If you keep following up that curve line, it should keep going up on the top of the screen. And look, it resets again. Every single time he changes his the window he's looking through, it just resets the curve. I mean, how many curves are there of the Earth? Just like in Rob Skiba's video, where he said, you know, if you claim to see the curvature from this angle, when you slide over, if you see the curvature again, we're basically living in a McDonald's logo. But look at this; it just keeps resetting every time at the same angle. So yeah. So anyway, I just wanted your guys' opinion of this. If you thought this was awkward, that it keeps doing this. I mean, for me, it was very.
Yeah, I'm going to say that's real awkward. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mentioned that, like, God, it's been a while ago, but I noticed that same thing when we were doing the ISS live watches, and I was like, you've got a curve in front of you, a curve off to the right, a curve to the left, and a curve behind you. And it's like, what are they trying to say? The Earth is like a 4-leaf clover? But I think this guy put it a lot better than I did. But yeah, same diff.
Yep. So yeah, pretty awesome. I love, and that's the great thing about this community is, we've looked at this a million times. I never ever caught that before. Obviously you did, John, but it's great. You never know what perspective or what point of view a newcomer is going to come along with and say, hey, this doesn't seem right to me. How does this look to you? And when he put it the way he did, and you're watching that curvature reset itself on every window of the cupola, it's like, whoops.
I think the bigger question still is, why has nobody ever looked out that window at night? It's never happened. Nobody will dare look out the cupola window at night. That's a problem. Globers, find the answer to that. And when you do, you'll just...
Jaron, it's because of the control lights that are inside the cupola will blind them and they won't be able to see the Earth lights. The aperture.
Or the stars. They won't be able to see the stars or anything.
Correct. Because of the reflection from the lights inside the space station.
And they don't turn off. They're like those auto on, like motion lights.
You can't turn them off because that's how they control the space station. Come on, science, man.
Yeah. Oh, and that's one other last thing that I want to bring up that we brought up before that is just going to kind of put a cherry on the top of this. First of all, shout out to Napoleon 2000 for this video that I played earlier, explaining or asking the question how we can see the stars billions of light years away or thousands of light years away or whatever. I played this earlier, and I just wanted to give him a shout out and thank you for allowing us to use this video. But what I wanted to get back to is, as we all know, the ISS, being at roughly 250 miles up, is right smack dab in the middle of what we call the thermosphere. Okay, now the thermosphere, even according to Wiki, is an area of the atmosphere that gets to incredibly high temperatures, as high, in fact, as 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, okay, or over 2,000 Celsius or whatever. In other words, it's really, really hot. Now, many people have asked the question, well, why doesn't it just melt the ISS, essentially? And the answer to that is because, once again, the air molecules are so sparse at that altitude that they do not have enough excitation or overall heat generated when they run up against the ISS to cause any significant difference. sparse. Now, the problem with this is that, yes, it may be true that the air is too sparse on the outside of the International Space Station, but on the inside of the International Space Station, obviously they have to have an atmosphere that is somewhat close to 14.7 pounds per square inch. It may be a little less than that, or whatever, but it's in that vicinity. The bottom line is it is a nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere that is only separated from the outside cosmic radiations by a thin sheet of aluminum. And anybody that thinks that this thin sheet of aluminum is capable of shielding the astronauts or the inside of the space station where there is a full Earth-like atmosphere, anybody that thinks that thin aluminum shielding on the outside is capable of doing that, definitely picked the wrong day to stop smoking crack. All right, it doesn't happen. So what should happen is those cosmic radiation rays should be superheating the atmosphere on the inside of the International Space Station, because there simply is no way to adequately shield the ISS from that cosmic radiation that's going on there, and it absolutely should be having that effect. So once again, by whatever miracle they're going to tell us, whatever reason that it doesn't burn up or basically evaporate everything on the inside, where there is an Earth-like atmosphere, is another one of those just wonderful NASA mysteries. Any comments?
No,
That's some comment I have on NASA.
It's so true, because they say they're in the thermosphere, which is mind-boggling temperatures, but it can't be measured because the molecules are so farly spread apart. Whatever, it's a very low density area. But assuming that the ISS is up there, made of metal and such, yeah, it should be absorbing heat energy, slowly over time. But there's nowhere for that heat energy to go. So over 15, 16 years or whatever, that thing should be like a roasting oven. But somehow they've solved that issue.
Yeah, somehow. I'd like to hear the explanation for it. That'd be akin to saying that the thin layer of the Apollo command module was thick enough to protect the astronauts from the lethal Van Allen radiation belt radiation. And that's assuming, of course, guys, that that's even a real thing. I mean, that in and of itself could be a complete, notion of horse hockey. In fact, they say the mainstream explanation for the South Atlantic magnetic anomaly is that the Van Allen radiation belts are actually dipping down all the way through the atmosphere and coming down to the Earth, and that's what's giving us our South Atlantic magnetic anomaly, which again, really? So with that, again, people, all we're doing is asking you to use your head, use a little common sense. Do not take everything that the quote-unquote experts in the white coats are telling you as gospel, because they are nothing more than preachers in a white lab coat rather than a black robe and a collar or whatever. It's the same thing. And you cannot believe them. You've got to use your own discernment. Don't trust us. Don't trust anybody. Do the investigation, do the work yourself, and use your common sense. I love Curious Life. Kurt Curious Life's at the end of every video, he shows a picture of a brain, right? And then he has a little finger pointing it up to it, and it says use, right? Use your brain. Think about this. What they're telling us is a bunch of nonsense built on other nonsense, all of which none of it can be demonstrated in any way, shape, or form. And then, of course, when we come up with our models, which are demonstrable in a lab and are based on real phenomenon, they just sit there and poo-poo on us using the very same mainstream rhetoric, just parroting it to try and debunk our case. Sorry, guys, it's not going to work. And if that's the limit of your thinking, then you're dumber than we thought you were, right? So again, I know that people that are open-minded enough to be considering the idea of what we're saying here may be true. Obviously, that's a first step, because once you start down this road and trying to debunk it, it's going to be the same as happened with all of us. We all tried to debunk this idea because we've all been indoctrinated by the very same rhetoric that everybody has. We all went through the same school system. We all heard the same lessons. I'm older than a lot of people, and a lot of people are older than me, and a lot of people are younger than me.
I'm going to dispute that one.
Right. But regardless,
how old are you, Bob?
I'm 56.
Well, when I'm your age, I'll be 57.
There you go. That's relativistic thinking, right? So whatever, but yeah, so that's basically what we want to say. That's why we do this show. We're trying to invoke a little bit of common sense in people's thinking rather than to follow the white coat rhetoric. So
Is David still here? David, are you there? I don't know if you left.
No, I'm here. I was just on mute.
Do you have it on your channel, the stair step video, the staircase?
Yeah. It's the second newest video on there, the Stairway to Disbelief.
Yeah, it's excellent to watch. It's exactly what Bob is describing, and how you get started on that staircase, and it's you never stop going. And there's so many people out there that are afraid to take that first step.
Because deep down inside, their subconscious knows that step is going to lead them all the way to the top eventually. And, depending on how you take that journey, it could be a painful one.
Yeah, there's no other excuse for the people that are on every one of my videos in the comment section losing their mind. If I don't like a video, I don't watch it. I move on. That's how life works. But when you are on a video nonstop, they're yelling, screaming, idiots, fools, it's because deep down inside, they have the same questions and they're praying that it's not true what I'm saying, because if it is true, well, then they got to be accountable for the shitty things that they do, and they have to relearn things. They'll have to actually go out and research and study, and nobody wants to do that.
Correct.
I found another one. I just had to resubscribe to your channel, Dave, so I rung the bell and everything. So hopefully I will stay subscribed.
Yeah, that's really getting annoying that YouTube is doing that. At some point, I have a feeling, with the way that they're taking away, content, they're getting rid of it. You have these, YouTube is just really screwing up. It's really becoming pathetic. And I think at some point, they're just going to wind up squeezing out everybody that doesn't follow the mainstream rhetoric. And so, look for that to happen. I have no doubt, but what it will, it's slowly happening now.
I found myself unsubscribed to Jeranism and ODD the other day when I went to their channel to see if there's anything new. Unsubscribed, unnotified, everything. So it's interesting what they're doing.
Yeah. The same thing happened with me live with Theoria Apophysis. Ken Wheeler, I'm looking at it going, whoa, how did I get unsubscribed? But it's happening. So, just be aware that it's happening. And it may be, just pure technical problems on Google's part. Who knows? I mean, it's a pretty sophisticated network, and a lot of little things can go wrong. But I don't know. I tend to think that there's a concerted effort against anybody trying to spread the message of truth, and they're working against us in every possible way they can without being totally overt about it. Yeah,
for sure. And if anybody, I put it in the chat earlier, wants to take my latest video and go to John B. Wells's Facebook page or Caravan to Midnight and bombard him with it there, that would be great, because he's a flat Earth enemy number one for me. And he just needs a little truth beating.
Yeah, he's pretty arrogant for sure. I can't believe him. Of course, flat Earth asshole definitely has his issues with him as well. But it's pretty funny. Pretty funny to watch all this drama going on.
The only reason I say, just keep sending him stuff is because he is a truth seeker. He says every day that they have an open mind, they're willing to hear anything, but he refuses to look at flat Earth. And I have no problem with anyone that refuses to look at it until they day by day slam it and make up lies about what we believe. He constantly quotes, that just ridiculous things that he thinks that flat Earth researchers believe, and none of them are true. So it's my little pet peeve. It's just something to do if you want to have some fun.
Well, it's so funny because could you imagine if the roles were reversed and like flat earthers were just totally misrepresenting the heliocentric model and then trying to support flat Earth with like circumstantial evidence, but it's totally the other way around. I mean, flat earthers know all about the globe Earth model, but globe heads don't know anything about the truth. And so, but yeah, if the roles were reversed, they would just totally. I mean, we'd never hear the end of it. I mean, and really, you'd lose your reputation as a credible, flat earther pretty quickly. And so we have to know the heliocentric model and represent it, exactly as they claim. And even still, you'll get people who say that you're making that up, like, I don't know, in terms of the Selenelion and stuff like that, but whatever.
Yeah. So, all right, guys. Well, I think I've covered just about everything I have. Is there anything that any of you want to talk about before we cut out?
Yeah. One thing I just wanted to touch on real quick, and maybe this will just be food for thought until next week, unless Jaron has something. But earlier we were talking sort of like about Electric Universe and things like that. And I've just my research has sort of led me down a road, and this may be new to y'all. This was new to me. Maybe I'm just really behind during the times. But okay, so we all know that our bodies are essentially electric devices. Electric currents run through our brains, and that's what causes our muscles to react and stuff like that. It's electric, but
and all the magnetic fields going on too.
Exactly. And so if you ask a modern doctor, well, where does our body's electricity come from? At the end of the day, most of them will look at you like you're crazy. But the actual answer is it's generated by the heart. They think that it's the mechanisms of the heart that are generating the body's electricity, more or less. I mean, there's more to it than that, but more or less that's what they claim. Now, if you look at, I was just doing some research into yoga and the swamis and sort of like what they teach as a body science. And according to these guys, essentially people and pretty much all living creatures are free energy devices where essentially we're gathering electricity and energy from the ether. And they have a word for it. They call it prana. But essentially what they've been, practicing for thousands of years is that, there's evidence supporting this as well. Like if, maybe the numbers are off a little bit, but if the air you breathe is 17% oxygen, when you breathe it in, it's 17%, but when you breathe it out, it's like 15% oxygen. So we're not leaching all of the oxygen out of the air, which really makes you wonder, how important is oxygen actually to physiology? And to me, it makes way more sense than to say that the heart is generating the electricity, but instead, us breathing in the air that is, electrically charged, we're actually, like I said, free energy devices, getting our electricity from the ether itself.
Yeah, well, the only thing I can say about that, John, is the heart is the greatest source of the magnetic field that's emanated from the body. And as we know, and we've covered this many times before, electricity and magnetic fields are, essentially one and the same. You can't have one without the other.
Right,
so
right.
There's definitely a lot of electrical activity going on, in the heart when it's beating, and it's generating an enormous magnetic field. But, as I speculated before, when we're talking about this electrical construct that we occupy here on Earth, that honestly, I don't believe that if we ever got outside of it, that we'd be able to survive, because we are literally at one with the electrical field of the plane. Now, this is my opinion. All right, let me make that clear.
Right. So you guys got to check out Sophia Smallstorm has been doing a lot of work on the heart, and what she's pointing out, along with other researchers, is that the heart is not a pump that's forcing blood, to the tip of our toes and to the top of our hands and to the tips of our fingers, but the heart is actually an electric charger, and it charges the blood. So it has an electrical charge to it, and that's how blood goes around our body. And when you're exercising, you're adding more charge to your blood to make it circulate farther. So it's impossible for the heart as a pressure valve to be pushing it through bigger and smaller arteries all around your body. It just wouldn't work. It's an electrical charging unit.
Yeah. That makes sense, and it still begs the question, where does that electricity originate from? And to me, it really makes a lot of sense that we're actually, we're not just breathing in oxygen, but we're actually taking in electrical energy, whether it's static, electric, or whatever, from the air itself. And, when you look at practical applications of free energy, like with what Tesla was doing, to me, it makes a whole lot of sense.
Yep. So, all right. Well, so there you have it. So anyway, I have to laugh. I saw some guy say, "Oh, you guys aren't spreading truth. You're spreading theories because, everything you say is a theory." It's like, well, maybe everything we say is a theory, but at least we have demonstrable proof that can be replicated in the lab for our theories. All right. What NASA peddles on us in our mainstream can only be verified by NASA. All right. So frankly, I would much rather trust myself and what can be replicated here on good old plain Earth by your average Joe or even your average scientist on the plane that can be visibly replicated than I am ever going to take the word of NASA, who speculatively makes up a bunch of horse hockey that none of it can ever be proven ever. So, take that and put that in your pipe and smoke it. Theories. You're sitting here, ridiculing our theories, and you're buying into the biggest theory ever, an assortment of them. So anyway.
Well, and I don't know if he was, I don't know don't know if he was talking about in context of what I was saying, but I mean, obviously our bodies do have an electrical component to them. And I think that the theory pushed forth by modern science that the heart is somehow an electrical generator is ridiculous. And it makes a whole lot more sense that because we know that you can gather energy from the ether, that's a provable thing. And so it's really not so much theoretical to me as in connecting the dots. And I don't know, this was just something that I was interested in here recently, and I'm looking more into it. So I'm certainly no expert on the whole thing or by any means, but I'm just always looking for new explanations for things. And if just simply mentioning this can get somebody thinking in different direction, maybe you never know what comes of it. So I was just throwing that out there. But I don't think we necessarily have to say that the Earth is a spinning sphere because John the Morgile theorized that our body's electricity may come from the ether.
Yeah, and we're going to be presenting a lot more theories as well. One of our guests is coming on soon, and I know you're going to love this one, David. Is we're going to be having Devin Maggi on either next week or possibly the week after. What we're waiting for is for Devin to finish his semester of school, and he told me as soon as he does that, he will be in contact with me. I actually have his phone number already, and he's going to be in contact with me, and we're going to talk about some of the very interesting stuff that he proposes, which goes right back to something, David, that you and Sophia were talking about, and that is the idea that civilizations are kind of going from the inner ring of plain Earth and migrating outwards, which this should be a really interesting discussion.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. Devin's work, along with lots of other researchers that I've looked into, gave me that idea, and when I've been researching it, it just makes so much sense. There's so much evidence that points to it. I'm not saying it's the end all, but it sure makes a lot of sense for disappearing ancient civilizations where they're just moving outwards, and the ice ring keeps us separated. If all of North America froze down to Mexico, everybody would quickly migrate down to Brazil and South America, and Africa or wherever. And then if a new sun came up in the north, they wouldn't even know about it because there would be a Arctic wasteland in between them, and they just wouldn't be able to get there unless, of course, they had the technology to fly over or tunnel under.
Yep. So yeah, that'll be something that we'll be covering with Devin, and maybe David, you might even want to join us for that because I think it'll be an interesting discussion.
For sure.
So yeah, for sure. So anyway, all right. I also wanted to point out a couple of things. There is a website out there that William Genske recreated by copying a lot of the content from ditrh.com, and it is called stoplookthink.com, and William has done an outstanding job in recreating it and also even modifying it to some level. He's done a wonderful job, so kudos to you, William, on that. But again, it's stoplookthink.com, and that's got a lot of great answers in it, so anybody that's looking for that, go ahead and go there and check that out. And did you have any other information on that, David, that you wanted to talk on? Or?
No, I don't. William did a great job on it, and it's a good place. I often visit it myself.
Yeah, me too. It's a good.
It's a heavily video loaded website, so it's a lot easier to navigate on a computer. But if you're on your phone, you can do it and come up with stuff, but it's just easier to navigate from a computer.
Yep. Okay. And other than that, again, also remember everybody, we have the Flat Earth International Conference coming up November 9th and 10th in Raleigh, North Carolina. A lot of your favorite flat earthers are going to be there, and all kinds of extra surprises, as I understand it from Robbie. So it ought to be quite a fun event. So keep that on your calendar because tickets are selling rather rapidly, and Robbie will be making an announcement at some point where he's going to do a countdown as we sell off the last of the tickets that are going for that. So just wanted to bring that up. And other than that, Jaron, did you have anything else that you wanted to bring up before we go?
Nope. I think just thanks everybody. Thank the mods for keeping control of chat. And if you heard my show last week on Raw, we had Jordan Maxwell on, and I kind of softballed him again, but I did get him to admit that the moon landings were fake and called him out for using the word billions and things like that when he's talking about years. And he by the end of the show was saying, no, I agree. I see where you're coming from as far as the ball Earth and the idea of space. And then after the show, he said he wanted to be on the show again. And so I think we're going to do like an every other week thing. And I'm going to slowly break down Jordan Maxwell until he admits that he doesn't doesn't live on a spinning ball.
Awesome.
Nice.
All right, beautiful. Okay, guys. Well, with that, I guess we will call it a show. And
I just wanted to thanks to all the live listeners. Thanks to everyone in the chat. Love you guys. And sorry, go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, God, we got almost up to 1,300 viewers live again today. Holy smokes, that's amazing. So again, thanks everybody for your support. Thank you, Theo Kirkley, again for another donation. He seems to be a weekly donation person in the super chat. We do appreciate it very much, and it'll help us in carrying out a lot of these experiments that we want to continue to do, to keep pushing the idea that there is another model, there are other explanations for this place that we live in, and we don't necessarily always have to take the word of the authority, which we have found so many times to be in error or in just a blatant lie. So with that, we'll get out of here, and we will see everybody next week. So until then, be good to each other. Don't lie to each other. Open your mind. There's truth inside. Peace out, everybody.
Peace.